for Thursday, October 28th, 2021. Sir, would you like to go right into the chop take bog discussion, or should we entertain any business not agenda?
Yes, we can go into chop take. Neil Price, can you hear me? I think Neil's still working on his audio. I can see him on the Zoom, but he's still working on his audio. If you want to just give him a minute, I just sent him a chat message to let him know that he has to use his cell phone to call in, not his computer audio. Neil, can you hear us?
I got you, Drew.
Oh, yeah, there you are. All right.
Sorry about that.
No problem. We just called, the chairman, Chad Smith, just called the meeting to order, and I'm going to stop screen sharing if you want to put up your images.
Okay.
All right. So whenever you're ready.
Share screen. Hey, everyone, let me know when you can see the slideshow showing up.
Okay. It still says you're a screen share, but we don't see the image yet.
Okay.
Do you have dual monitors, Neil?
I do, but I picked this. It should be the one. What does it look like on your end?
It says N Price has started screen sharing, but it's just black space.
Maybe it's coming.
It's going to be a long story. When you first start, I think you got to click the right screen. You probably try it again. I've never seen it take that long.
Say that again? I can't.
Try and click the other screen. You know, you've got to reboot it. It wouldn't ever take this long.
Yeah. You probably have to reboot it, Neil.
Or, well, not reboot, but at least start screen sharing and click the other screen.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. Got it.
Got it?
Got it.
Okay. All right. So thank you, everyone, for bearing with the technological stuff. We'll have to deal with them. Sorry I'm not there in person. Like a lot of people, I had some damage from the storm yesterday. I thought that both the roofer and the insurance adjuster were going to show today, but of course neither did. But we'll get there.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we're going to talk about both the chop chag bog restoration and the Questionnaire bog restoration. So we'll start with chop chag. You guys obviously know where this is, right off the Santuit Pond. Two bog cells, one larger than the other. Pump house and an old screening house there. Two culverts connecting one to the pond and the two bogs together. Looking at some old pictures, the left is the 1893 USGS map with no bog shown, and the right is 1941 where the bogs are present, telling us that the bogs were built sometime between 1893 and 1941. I heard today from Caitlin that I think Mark Robinson from the Cape Cod Compact said that he had looked up some deeds and thought that they were built like, I believe 1903 perhaps. So we had been thinking they were like 80 years old, but apparently they're more like 120 years old. So they've been there for some time. This project was it's a feasibility study to figure out how doable it would be to restore these bogs to wetlands that were there before. You know, what might be the right approach, and how much it might cost. And really, whenever you're looking at cranberry bog restoration, the primary considerations are how much sand is on the top, where is their peat, how thick is it, and what's the groundwater like? So because you obviously you need to get the bog surface down to close enough to the water table to provide wetland hydrology. And the issue with cranberry bogs is over, in this case, 100 plus years of adding sand periodically to them. The surface elevation has been raised well above the water table. So you need to get down to close to that water table elevation to support wetland hydrology. And how far you have to go dictates how much it costs to remove that material. So we'll start with the water level gathering. So we installed 3 wells, labeled 1, 2, and 3 on this figure. Can everyone see my cursor, by the way?
Yes.
Okay, great. And also out here in the pond, another stilling well. So those 4 spots, the 3 wells in the pond, had automated water level data loggers installed in them. So we're collecting data on a 1-hour interval in those, so we get very accurate long-term high-frequency data from those. We also put in 4 staff gauges in the ditches in the bogs, and those did not have data loggers. So those only had 3 distinct measurements when we were out in the field at them. This graph is showing the water levels from the 3 wells in the pond logger, so the 4 places with the fast data loggers in them, showing how water levels fluctuated over the study period from July 12th through August 31st. And there's a few interesting things here. First off, it was very dry at the beginning of the period. There were about 2 weeks where it hardly rained at all. And over that time period, you can see the water levels falling in each of the wells and also falling in the pond, but falling faster in the wells. And I believe that is due to the fact that all of the vegetation going on in those bogs, the wetland vegetation, is actively transpiring water from the ground to the atmosphere. So that impact, the combination of evaporation and transpiration going on in the bogs, is a greater loss than the sole loss from evaporation in the pond. Thus, you have a faster decline. And this is consistent with standard water budget thinking for how groundwater recharge occurs. So wetlands generally have 0 groundwater recharge, whereas ponds do have a small amount of recharge. So this trend makes sense with that general thinking. Then things get interesting when it starts to rain. So each of these little blue dashes are a rain event, and the right axis gets used for looking at the precip. So this was really one storm, but they crossed over the midnight time barrier, so it shows up as 2 separate items here. You combine this, 0.8 something and 0.3 something together, and you end up with about 1.2 inches of rain in that storm. And that kind of barely bumped the pond, probably by about 1.2 inches, or perhaps a little bit more from runoff coming into it. Whereas 2, and 1 in particular, of the cranberry bog wells dramatically rose in water level in response to these events. And the same thing happens, you can see it again in response to this rain event, it happens here. In response to this rain event, it happens here. So we think what's going on is that, rain is hitting the bog surface. They're kind of installed in low spots, so some runoff is going towards the wells. And because of that peat layer that's in there where these wells are screened, the water has a real hard time getting out of the well once it gets into it. So this looks like a surface water runoff getting into the well, creating this rise, and then it slowly decays away in the days following the rain event. So it makes life a little hard to look at what is probably really going on in the groundwater when it's raining. So you'll see then we kind of just isolated that period in July when it didn't rain to get a better feel for what the real groundwater situation was like there, which is shown here. Then we picked one of the days that we were out there collecting actual field data, so that we could use not just the automated Largus plots, but also the staff gauges. And we looked at the elevations at that time and mapped a water table contour map for the area. So you can see the flow from high to low. It's very flat. This is 0.2 of a foot of difference between this contour line and this contour line. So it's really flat, but there is a gradient of flow generally from the northeast to southwest, north-south, northeast, southwest. And that's consistent. This is the Cape Cod Commission GIS groundwater contours. The 48 is here. Don't worry about the values. There might be slightly different datums. The next one up, which was, I believe, the 50, is off the map to the north, but it shows a similar gradient from north to south in the area. So once we had this local scale information on water levels, we then went and compared it to nearby USGS index well. This is just a little over a mile away, over off of Cotuit Road, kind of near where that rotary is. And there's 40 some odd years of water level record from this index well. So by comparing our July monitoring period data from the site to this 40-year record at the index well, we could get a better feel for what we thought the overall long-term average water level conditions were. So that's shown here. It was a little wetter, water was a little higher this July than probably the long-term average conditions. So these are the adjustments that were made to compute long-term average water level conditions in the bogs for the purposes of figuring out how far, where we need to get at for getting the surface down near the water table. Well, actually, before I move on, any questions on the water level stuff?
Nope.
Okay, great. So we also did a habitat evaluation. Just again, this project was sort of a preliminary conceptual level, basic project. So the habitat again was a quick site visit, walking across in a zigzagging pattern. Our biologist recorded the species that they saw and grouped it into these 4 general communities: naturalizing cranberry bog, shallow emergent marsh, which is essentially the ditches, sandplain grassland, which is the upland habitat, and pitch pine oak forest, which occurs in a small little island in the middle, and then the bulk of the area surrounding the site as well. And we have areas for that, and the report documents the individual species that are shown here that are present. So we also did, I mentioned that peat was another one of the criteria along with the overlying sand and the water table. So we also did some probings in these transects shown here, where we essentially pushed narrow fiberglass chimney rods, about 1/4 inch diameter chimney rods, down through the peat until we hit the hard sand underneath it to calculate the thickness of peat. And this contour map is showing peat thickness with a 12-foot thickness max here, and this one's about 8, I believe, over on this side. So this is just showing the peat obviously developed in the wetlands. Over thousands of years that those wetlands existed before they were converted to cranberry bogs. So this is just indicating that these bogs were indeed natural wetlands beforehand for a long enough time to build up thick peat deposits. So they should if you were able to remove that overlying sand, these bogs should be able to support wetland habitat again, and hopefully there should be native seed bank present in this peat that will actually allow native wetland species to propagate once they're back exposed to the air in the right hydrologic setting again. This is just showing those cross sections that we were just showed in the map with the, this is the horizon between the underlying sand and the peat, and then the horizon between the peat and the artificially added sand during cranberry agriculture on the top. So there's about somewhere between 1 to 2 feet of artificially added sand on top of the peat layer here, the majority of which will need to get removed to get down to the proper elevation to have good wetland hydrology. And that's where most of the cost comes in, is the excavation that you might do to get there. And there's a couple of ways to go about it. We then moved into a concept design, and we're calling this one the preferred alternative because it was the first one that we came up with that met a lot of the criteria that we discussed with Drew and Caitlin and the other project partners from the In Lieu of Fee program and Mass DER about what this wetland might look like in a restored condition. And the thinking was to try to create a variety of wetland types with different wetness, deeper water versus shallower water, to get some different wetland habitats, which would be more typical of a normal wetland, a natural wetland, as opposed to one single hydrology over the entire surface. So this design is showing that, where you, again, trying to save money and minimize excavation, where the bulk of the area is brought down the minimal amount to support a shrub swamp, fairly dry wetland vegetation type, with deeper pockets excavated to create deep and shallow emergent marsh as well. And that material that gets excavated to bring all these down first goes into filling these ditches, the perimeter ditches and the interior ditches, filling this area. So by the way, our probing showed that this little lockout, this little key here in Bog 2 is not wetland. This was cut in, so the upland that probably existed before the cranberry bogs likely did something like so, and then they dug this out to connect the two bog cells together. So we were proposing to fill these ditches in and then build up some, on the existing upland, build up some higher topography using the excess material to avoid having to take it off site, and also just to create some visual relief and topographic interest on the site. Other features shown here include the installation of wood chip bioreactors in the upgradient parts of the perimeter ditches. So that's in yellow. So here, here, and here. And the idea here is wood chips or other carbon sources are fast proving to be good ways to do denitrogenation, to convert nitrate in groundwater into nitrogen gas and help mitigate some of the nitrogen pollution that we are suffering from so badly on the Cape. And there's been some experimentation with doing this in cranberry ditches. So we only place them on the upgradient sides because the idea is to capture upwelling groundwater that has septic effluent in it in these ditches. There's no point in doing it on the downgradient side. And that's the general preferred alternative. The cost for this this alternative was somewhere in the upper, not $1 million, but up in that 600, 700 range, likely at this concept level, which is more than we learned afterwards that was probably going to be available to support this. So we then looked at a lower cost alternative with some less excavation. And that's this one, where we essentially don't have any of that deep marsh, shallow marsh, deeper excavation. And instead, we're using we also got rid of the wood chip bioreactors, and trying to keep the costs down. And the idea here would be to use a methodology that DER has been using recently on other cranberry projects called pluck and chuck, which essentially is having an excavator go out, dig some holes, and then cast the excavated material off to the side in piles within reach. So you don't have to move the material around as much. That reduces cost. The less you're moving stuff, the less it costs. So that's where this, and that's not really shown. We're not showing all that, though, that pit and mound topography here. But the idea is this would be, some parts would have some holes that were wet, and then there'd be some mounds of stuff that would end up being high. And the result of that, of course, is the mounds would not be wetland. They would be up above the water table, and the hydrology would not be supportive of wetland vegetation. So you end up with less, of course, you end up with less area of wetland restoration, less varied wetland types, but the cost of this is likely in somewhere in the $300,000 to $500,000 range, getting you down below the threshold of where available funding exists. So that's kind of where this project ends at this concept stage. And, you know, the next stages, of course, would be to decide further on what approach we want to pursue, do some more field work and more design to further that, do the permitting, and then ultimately go out to bidding into construction to do whatever the preferred alternative ended up being. That's the end of the Chag discussion. So let's open that to questions and discussion, please.
Anybody have any questions on that?
Thank you very much. Drew, would you like to offer commentary?
Sure. So we, as Neil had gone over, we were looking at, having these cost alternatives because, as the commission is aware, when we've been updating you all on this project, is that this is, we have a grant opportunity through the state's in lieu fee program. And they're working with, not a set budget, so to speak, but a budget that doesn't cover full wetland restoration like the ideal alternative scenario would be. So that's not to say that that scenario wouldn't take place. It would require supplementary funding. It would require more grant research to see what sort of funding is out there. And so that's going to be, part of the process. This is all just a lot of kind of moving parts at this point in time. And as Neil had said, this is very conceptual level design that we're looking at here with two different alternatives really based on cost. So that's really it in a nutshell is where we're at this phase, the conceptual phase. And once we make a final determination as far as what sort of restoration we want to ultimately have out there, the next steps would involve getting a final plan in place and then going through the permitting and construction phases. So it's similar to what's happening out at the Upper Questionnaire as well. And this is very similar in overall restoration conceptual approach that you may have seen out at other nearby restoration projects, Eel River over in Plymouth, and then locally here on the Cape, Childs River Restoration, and then Coonamessett River, yeah. So all similar settings, all wetland restoration, although those other examples involved riverfront as well, the rivers that have been heavily diverted and disturbed as a result of cranberry bog production. So yeah, that's basically where we're at right now. It's just the conceptual design. We wanted Neil to present the details of how he's, Horsley Witten, the consultant, has arrived at these restoration scenarios, the testing they've done out there, the data collection, all leading to this conceptual plan. So, does anyone have any questions on that?
Questions from the commissioners?
Drew, what would be the length of time before we would decide which way to go? I mean, if there is funding out there, is it time constraints on that, or?
It's also contingent upon the in lieu fee program's review of the project. We have our contract with Horsley Witten, but we also have a contract with the in lieu fee program to to communicate all of this information, and they do have to ultimately review the merits of each of these alternatives. And we'll be working closely with them, so it'll be somewhat contingent on their timeline as well.
Right. So we wouldn't decide until we hear back from them on their review.
Yes.
Correct. Yeah. He was asking about timeline. There's a question on timeline, Neil. You know, how long? And we had answered just it's tied into the contracts that we have with In lieu fee and the availability of their funds and the deadline on their side. So it's all tied into those types of parameters.
Correct. Yeah.
So it can be, it is a bit of a tight timeline, but, you know, ideally we would like to see what other types of funding might be out there, or maybe there could be some offsetting of costs by using our own town resources, DPW. So all of that still has to get vetted out. But, you know, depending on how much we can offset the cost between now and the contract deadline will really dictate what type of restoration scenario we'll see out here ultimately. And Neil, if we were to go with, you know, the lower cost alternative, just a question to put out there, would that prohibit any further work after that? Would that still be feasible if we were to encounter additional funds, or would that kind of disturbance going in and creating deep water habitat after you've already gone through pit and mound approach? What's your take on that?
I think that, I mean, it wouldn't be impossible, but I think it would be far from ideal.
Yeah.
It would, yeah, and the cost would be even higher than any of the other ones, because you'd essentially be duplicating work. I think it might make sense to, you know, as we further evaluate this stuff, to keep both ideas in hand, try to pursue the more expensive one, and kind of see what the cost, you know, what the available funding is looking like, and what the costs are actually coming in at from contractors. You know, as everyone knows, when we can estimate till we're blue in the face, but all that really matters is what someone is willing to get paid to do this construction work, and you don't really know that until you get into it. And especially now, as I'm sure everyone knows, the construction world, well, the whole world, but the construction world in particular is in great flux with all of the economic repercussions coming after the pandemic, and costs are all over the place and mostly going up. But who knows how, hopefully that direction changes with some more time passing by.
And there's a potential for a phased approach ultimately as well, if that is deemed appropriate.
A phased approach is another option too. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah, and you could potentially you could permit everything and potentially only do one of the bog cells at a time. And of course, ultimately that's more money because you're mobilizing people back, but that is another option to think about as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the commission? Doesn't look like there's any other questions, so.
Okay.
Great. Thank you very much.
So let's move on to the Questionnaire. And let me start by offering my apologies to the commission, the same apologies I've given to Drew a couple of times already. We have been slower on this project than I or anyone would like for a lot of reasons, many of the same reasons that we've just been talking about with how the world has gone with the pandemic and staffing and et cetera. But we are doing our best to catch up. And so let me go through where we're at and where we're going on this. So similar to, as I showed for Chag, I always like to look at these old maps to show how sites have changed over time as an indicator of how long, for example, cranberry bogs have been here. So again, in the 1890s, this is the upper Questionnaire area shown as a wetland, the Questionnaire River exiting Johns Pond and heading south. No cranberry bogs present in the 1890s. But it's the next, unfortunately, there's always a big gap. In New England, it seems like the general scale, the time frame of available USGS maps is generally something in the late 1890s and then something in either the late 1930s or early 1940s. and there's a 30 to 40 year gap of available mapping. That's unfortunate, but that's just reality. So by the time the 1940s come around, all of these bogs have been built. And then this is the more recent 1990s one where you can see the bogs here. So we're probably talking something in a similar time frame to what we talked to with Chag, probably pushing something in the vicinity of 100 years, plus or minus, that those bogs have been in existence. And by the way, I'm sorry, I know when I've turned it on to slideshow mode, but the slideshows are showing up on my other screen, which isn't sharing, and I can't seem to get it back. So hopefully you can bear with looking at this smaller view of the slides as I go through in the slide sorter view. Just to refresh people on the site, so that triangle of, let's go back here, this triangle of wetland area is now this general triangle of bog area. This photo is from a good amount of time ago, probably before 2010, when it still looks like cranberry bog. Now, if anyone who's been out there, it's rapidly being reclaimed by various habitat types. A lot of pitch pines and other trees and shrubs going on out there now. The reason, the available funding for this project, and one of the main reasons we're doing this, is a berm that the Air Force built to help separate the river from potential contamination plumes failed, and because of that failure, this money has become available to pursue restoration of these bogs. The reason I mention that, not just because it's a source of funding, but also the reason for the failure is the very soft sediments that exist in this central portion of the site. So trying to walk around and do survey out in this area, as we've done recently, you can easily lose a person if you're not careful. So one of the things we're thinking about in restoration concept is to try to not do too much earthwork in this super soft area in the middle of the site where it seems like things don't want to be particularly stable. We'll come back to that a little bit later in the presentation. Immediately before COVID, one of the first things we did is have the site flown with drones collecting all sorts of really cool information. And this picture is showing a high resolution, just visual frequency visual of the site, where you can see individual trees and the water and the berms and the roads and buildings. This was taken in January, I believe, and with a little bit of light snow on the ground. So you can see, the sand pits are popping up white, and it creates a nice relief. And we've used this as our base map for a lot of the design thinking that we've been doing going forward on that. The other really cool thing that the drone was able to do was thermal imagery, which is shown here. So the thermal camera is essentially showing contrast. Because this was done on a very cold January day with snow on the ground and ice on much of the open water, thin ice, but ice, the places that are red, the warm areas, are actually the areas of groundwater upwelling, and the purple and blues are cooler areas because, as I think everyone knows, the groundwater is staying constant at something around 50 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. So in the summertime, the groundwater is much cooler than the surface water, but vice versa in the winter when this stuff was shot. So the red is showing areas. Not this red is the sand pit that was baking in the sun at the time of the image, but the red within the actual bogs themselves and the stream channel and the ditches is showing areas where there was a lot of groundwater upwelling going on. And that's important because we want to try to target one of the key goals of this restoration is to preserve fish habitat and namely brook trout habitat amongst some others, including herring, obviously. But brook trout like cold water. So the idea is to identify where there is already a lot of cold groundwater, cold in the summertime, that is, groundwater entering the system to try to target stream restoration activities to intercept that cold groundwater to keep a cold water environment for potential brook trout habitat. Let's see here. Another key, as I mentioned with Chop Chag, another key element is the peat. So the NRCS went out with ground penetrating radar. Rather than doing that whole probing stuff that we did by brute force at Chop Chag, they used ground penetrating radar to essentially look through into the subsurface and map where peat was thick. In this case, the thick areas are shown here in this purple to green color. So there's some cells of really thick peat. They weren't able to cover the entire site. You can see they're only getting the area west of the river and only down south to that first main culvert crossing. So we don't have this data for the rest of the site, unfortunately. But this again is useful for targeting where you want the focus of your wetlands restoration to be in these peat cells. You'll see later, we're trying to balance those two things I mentioned about being near the peat, but also trying not to do a whole lot of earthwork in the really soft areas here, where our current thinking is to not always be trying to put the stream straight through the thick peat, but to have the stream nearby and be able to have this thick peat area be, restored wetland area, as opposed to not necessarily direct stream channel. This summer, we were out. Let me back up here. So I talked about the visual imagery and the thermal imagery that the drone was able to shoot. The third very cool and very important thing was the drone shot LiDAR topography. LiDAR stands for light detection and ranging. This has become common practice in about the last dozen years. USGS and other government agencies do it by airplane. So we have in Massachusetts, we're fortunate, we're one of the few states that has high-resolution LiDAR topography data for the entire coastal area of Massachusetts. This drone-based LiDAR is a little bit finer resolution at the site scale because the drone is flying so much lower to the ground than the airplanes are that get used to do the regional scale LiDAR mapping. But one of the shortcomings of LiDAR is the laser that's shot down from above, either by plane or drone, does not penetrate the water surface. So it does a really good job of getting fairly high resolution topography for land, but it doesn't do a good job of showing you the symmetry under the water. And we do need that for restoration design. So we went out a bunch of days this past spring and summer and conducted topographic field survey in the river, in the ditches. We didn't get absolutely every foot of absolutely every ditch or every foot of every river channel, but we got a lot of it. Both transects going across and profiles running up and down it. And we then melded that with the drone LiDAR topography to create a unified topography mesh so we understand all of the relief going on the site for the design. We also did a similar but more detailed habitat invasive species evaluation, and that's the coloration shown on this base map here with these four main vegetation communities being shown: wet meadow marsh, shrub swamp, wet meadow marsh transitioning to mixed pine woodland, and open meadow. We have a list of all the species found. The red is showing areas of intensive invasive species presence as observed in the field. And so that's the sort of the culmination of the field base map existing conditions mapping that has been done to date. Then we moved on to modeling. So to do a river restoration, so Chop Chag doesn't have a river. Chop Chag is just bogs going to wetlands, whereas here at the Questionnaire, we want to restore a river system with bordering vegetated wetlands. So in order to understand and design a river channel, you need to understand the flows, both the velocity and the elevations of the water, and that gets done in a model built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers called HECRAS, which essentially is a cross-sectional model. So each of these black lines that you can see in this plan view are cross-sectional transects that went into the model, and we made each of these cross-sections based on our field survey combined with the drone LiDAR survey. And this is an example of one of those in the model shown here. So this is a cross-section across the river, showing the variation of the bog surface on either side, and then the actual river channel in the middle. And the blue is where the water is in this particular simulation. So HECRAS essentially, takes whatever hydrology. You can do storm events, you can do certain exceedance durations, and it sends it from one cross-section to the next, and the height and velocity of the water experienced at any transect is then dictated by the cross-sectional geometry that water is being forced to go through. So you can then use this to predict, well, how high will the water be at a certain spot under a certain condition, and how fast will the water be flowing at a certain spot under a certain condition. So we're in the process of putting together this HECRAS model that you can see the beginnings of here that's being used to develop concept designs for the river restoration. And then, so this, Drew will recognize this. This is a rough back of the napkin, not a napkin, but a map, close enough to a napkin, sketch of what he and I were thinking about for potential restoration design options before any of that work that I just went through. That kind of shows two branches of the river coming together, again, keeping the main bit of flow and the work away from the soft area, using this cold water area that we didn't know at that time was going to be cold, but we now know is cold, in the shade posed by this high hillside here to put the main river channel along. And trying to limit, the black is trying to limit the earthwork to keep costs down for the main area. We might be rethinking that depending on money and all that, but trying to take advantage of those peat deposits, we might want to expand that somewhat. And I'm just showing this because it's interesting that this is our working concept design in a much better looking image that takes all of the data that we've gathered and that base mapping and the modeling done to date to show a preliminary concept of how this restoration might work. In this case, we've actually done some math to compute the meander bends for the hydrology and topography of the site, and place them and try to minimize the amount of work that needs to be done, try to utilize those existing channels that have cold water that aren't terribly overly straightened as much as possible, and then only deviate from those where it looks necessary to either get into cold water or to avoid having to do work in really wet, soft material. So the green is the existing stream system, and the black is the draft conceptual proposed stream system. So similar, but some slight movements of it. Yellow are the existing berms. This brown shaded area are areas of the thickest peat shown from the ground penetrating radar, with the idea being to target those for primary wetlands restoration. So that's where we're at with the concept now. So all of these things are still ongoing. We've got a little bit more field work to do. It's sort of an iterative process, right? You do modeling and you design and you identify where you have gaps and you go back and try to fill them, and through this process try to come out ultimately with a improved process. So that's what we're doing right now. Next steps are to refine the hydrology input. So we feel pretty good about that cross-sectional geometry that we've made, but there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of options for how you define how much water to put into the system, especially because this is such a groundwater-dominated system. So we're looking at that, working with USGS has been gathering stream flow there, but their station has only been out for a few months now, so there's not a lot of data yet. So we're trying to correlate that small data set with other downstream longer data sets to get a better idea of the range of hydrology to run through this model. Then we're going to refine the design alternatives. We'll discuss it further with all of you. And ultimately, our scope of work includes a public outreach. We have 2 phases. Our scope of work has 2 phases. We're in the closing stretches of the first phase now that will culminate with the town and project partners selecting a preferred alternative. It will then go to public outreach. If everyone agrees with that, then in phase 2, that selected alternative gets advanced further to the 50% design level, which would be suitable for permitting. And that's once we get to that 50% design, that's the end of our current contracted work, and then it would be move on next to actually do permitting. Then, as we talked about with Chag, then do final design and construction bidding and construction after that. So let's open it to, well, first, maybe we start with Drew if you have anything to add to this, and then we can open up to discussion with everybody.
Sure. So not too much to add to Neil's presentation, but just to remind the commission what the whole purpose of this restoration is really, the primary goals, I should say, of the restoration are to improve fish passage. This, as everyone knows, this is the primary passage into Johns Pond, the upper Questionnaire River, for river herring, which is blueback and alewife, and also to improve conditions in the bog for brook trout habitat and restore cold water fishery habitat. So those are the 2 primary goals, and obviously wetland restoration coincides with that, improving the riparian corridors, improving flow, improving fish passage, improving water quality. And as you may know, there's been a significant amount of restoration work that's taken place over, I think, decades in the mid and lower sections of the Questionnaire River in terms of improving brook trout habitat by both Mass Fish and Wildlife and the Cape Cod chapter of Trout Unlimited. And so they've been doing a lot of work because this old bog system traveled, I think it was pretty extensive and took up a majority of the footprint of the river. I think at one time it was known as the world's longest cranberry bog. So there's been a lot of work in the mid areas of the river and lower sections to restore those areas as cold water fisheries, and it's been very successful. So this is kind of like the last piece of the puzzle, so to speak. And because of, and I'm sure you're all aware of the history of the Air Force, the contamination and remediation efforts, and what led to this situation of the upper Questionnaire going from more of a streamlined channel to a slow-moving sort of wetland in the middle area because of this section of berm failure, which, and Neil, if you want to just go back to that previous slide, I could just kind of highlight again to the commissioners where that failure has taken place. So right in the midsection, yeah, right there, that's the berm failure. And everything north of that, ever since the bog and peat started to inundate the river because of the sinking of that heavy berm, everything, water flow slowed down, water temperature rose, and those 2 aspects are really lethal for brook trout, and they also can lead to inhibiting fish passage. You get slow-moving water, you get more emergent vegetation coming in through the center channel. Even Caitlin and myself have had to go out there in a kayak and literally pull apart vegetation to allow the herring to get through this particular area on their way up to the fish ladder at Johns Pond. And it just keeps growing in thicker every year. So that's the fish passage component of this. So that's just a basic summary of the history of why this project came about. I know it's been on the table for quite some time, and I'm really thrilled to see this much data collection and how the information, the data is revealed some conceptual approaches and taking advantage of the groundwater upwelling areas. So that's all really great to see. And I'm very excited to the next phases of this project. Because it's a very important one. Like I said, there's been a lot of restoration work on the Questionnaire River by a lot of dedicated volunteers and groups. And this is really, would be kind of like that final piece of the puzzle, so to speak. So I'll hand it over to the commission if they have any questions. Too much information.
There's a lot.
It's a lot to absorb. It is.
And is this a separate funding initiative that?
Yes.
grant that we-
Yeah, so the funding, a good chunk of it came from the Air Force as part of their remediation funding and dealing with the berm failure. So now we're basically inheriting the berm situation and using that money that they would normally be using to, do ongoing monitoring of the failed berm area. So we negotiated, a price basically to dedicate funding towards restoration. And then we also got funding from the Community Preservation Act on top of this. And I would anticipate that there's going to be other funding sources that are going to be tapped into. As you know, Johns Pond Conservation Land is part of the Mashpee National Wildlife Refuge, so we've got a lot of stakeholders, a lot of partners, a lot of resources to take advantage of in this project as it moves forward through these phases. So, so that's definitely a good thing. That's part of the refuge, and we've got those types of resources moving forward.
Great.
Okay. Well, Neil, thank you very much for taking the time to present to the commission. It's very helpful, and I'm glad the commission has been updated with all this information. I know it's a lot to absorb, but and I'm sure there'll probably be questions, once we get further into these projects. But I want to thank you for your time in presenting this to the commission tonight under the existing circumstances.
My pleasure, Drew. Thank you. Thank you to commissioners. Everyone have a good evening.
All right, you too, Neil. Thank you. And
Bye now.
Don't forget to stop share.
I will. I'll do it right now. There we go.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hey, Drew, I'll give you a minute to hand out the materials for the 6 o'clock.
Yep. We'll pass those out. Caitlin's doing that now.
Thank you.
Okay. All set, Chad.
All right, thank you. Now calling to order the 6 o'clock hearing. 2 Keelan Way LLC, 2 Keelan Way, proposed demolition and reconstruction of single-family homes, septic system upgrade, and hardscape landscape modifications. Representative of Cape and Islands Engineering, and this is an NOI.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Matt Costa, Cape and Islands Engineering, representing the applicant. Mr. and Mrs. Keelan are here tonight in the audience as well. We're here tonight under a notice of intent application to raise and rebuild an existing structure. You can see Drew has it pulled up on the screen. That's the GIS assessor's map, and you can see highlighted in blue is the parcel. It fronts on shore in the corner of Keelan Way, private way. It's separated by another structure, dwelling, number 4 Keelan Way, from the adjacent wetland areas. Your wetland resource areas for this project include a coastal bank and land subject to coastal storm flowage. The coastal bank is off-site and is located adjacent to the dwelling at number 4 Keelan Way. Here we have Drew has the site plan pulled up, and we're showing in brown the footprint of the new dwelling. You can see in the dashed line underneath, which he's outlined, is the footprint of the existing dwelling. And you can see in the blue to the right of that screen, the coastal bank. That's the coastal bank based on slope criteria in relation to the flood zone. And you can see in the lighter blue line, the flood zone line just comes onto the property. The buffer to the coastal bank is all legally previously disturbed. It is the entire site is developed as single-family residential lot. There is no work proposed in any naturally vegetated buffer areas. We're effectively relocating the house further from the coastal bank here. This plan does show the areas where we intend to mulch and to provide lawn. The lawn, of course, will be in accordance with Mashpee's lawn standards. There is an existing septic system on the site, Title V leach field, which we are proposing to connect to by way of installing a new septic tank shown in green in the front of the house. It's a very straightforward project. It meets all the applicable performance standards, and we're requesting you issue an order of conditions. Drew did pull up some pictures here, and you can just see the current conditions of the site, the existing dwelling, existing landscaping. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Drew, comment?
Sure, so just showing the commissioners some of the photos of the existing site. Again, this is a private road, Keelan Way in New Seabury. And there's the existing home. So this area here, you can see some of the staking for the footprint of the house rebuilt. Existing house in the background. Most of this property is previously altered in landscaping and hardscaping, and then existing lawn. Just another image here. This is the back side of the house facing the other house. To the east of it, existing house, and I think there's another photo here. So yeah, so this is the existing home. Here's the other home that borders the coastal bank and wetland resource areas. So just going back to the plan again, these are your resource areas on the site. You've got land subject to coastal storm flowage delineated here by this blue line. And then you've got coastal bank slope definition, most likely man-made coastal bank delineated here. And the two green dashed lines show the 50 and 100-foot setbacks to that coastal bank. Again, flood zone shown right here. So in terms of performance standards, the coastal bank would only be, the only performance standard associated with coastal bank is a vertical buffer to storm damage, a very slight vertical buffer. There is no impact to the bank itself. All impact is within the 50 and 100-foot buffer zones to coastal bank, which is primarily, almost entirely pre-disturbed. So, obviously the coastal bank is not a sediment source. Again, it's just a landform coastal bank. And I would recommend to close an issue. The conditions, the reason I had this recommended submitted as a notice of intent, because I believe projects, even if they are this far away from a resource area, given the scope and scale associated with your typical tear down and rebuild scenario, it should be conditioned for runoff control, sediment containment on the site, and everything that goes along when you're dealing with construction activities on this scale. And also to condition that the lawn meet the local lawn standards once the site is stabilized and revegetated. So there's no other comments on this?
And I'll read into the record the building and Board of Health comments. Building commented that this project was sent to ZBA for several reasons, and since it is a corner lot, there is a hardship. In my opinion, the excess of lot coverage and the encroachment of the deck to the 50-foot coastal bank buffer can be easily avoided. I do not consider a ground level patio a structure and leave that determination to the Conservation Department. And Board of Health commented that the property is in a Zone 2 and is restricted to existing 3 bedrooms with the conventional system. Septic design plan and floor plan to be reviewed upon submission to Health and Building Departments respectively.
Thank you. Questions, comments from the commissioner?
appear to be any questions from the commission.
Questions from the audience or anyone who's called in?
Nobody's called in on the line, and no questions from the audience.
In that case, I'll entertain a motion. This is an NOI, and there is a recommended condition.
I would move that we close an issue in regards to the application of Catherine Keelan Clapp at 2 Keelan Way with the following conditions: that the lawn, as called out, will comply with the town's standards, that we contain runoff, and any other sediment must be contained on the property.
Thank you, Brad. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you. Voting. Tom.
Aye.
Brian.
Yes.
Paul.
Yes.
Brad.
Yes?
I vote aye as well. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're just gonna collect up the plans, pass out new ones for the next agenda, next hearing.
I also have, good evening, everyone.
Once the chairman calls the hearing, we can begin. Okay, Chad, we're good.
All right, now calling the 603 hearing for Dennis P. Shields, 51 Centuit Lane. Proposed reconstruction of existing stairway and associated landscaping mitigation. Representative is Diane M. This is an RDA.
Good evening. I am representing my brother,
Could you
Dennis.
stand closer to the mic, please?
Oh, sorry.
Or sit closer
Yeah,
to
you
the
can
mic?
sit, you can have a seat.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm standing in for my brother who owns the property at 51 Santuit Lane. He lives in Maryland, and he's been having some illness during the last 6 to 10 months. So I've taken over the project to try to come before you and get the new staircase that we need to put on the property approved. What we've done is we've had a drawing drawn up, and I've submitted it to the commission. Give you some history of the property. The property was built in 1960s by my dad, my grandfather, and my uncle. My father was a lineman, so his idea was to put in a series of telephone poles because the hill was so steep, and then attach a boardwalk that you would go on levels down, and then a staircase to the pond. Well, that was in 1960, and we were in a situation where the telephone poles, because of the increase in the water levels in the pond every spring, the bottom telephone poles at the edge of the water became very rotten because they were underwater most of the time. I believe it was one of the bad storms in 2017. And we've had a lot of issues as a result of that. The water level fluctuates. People have lost their docks. We lost our walkway, and we've lost our dock. Every time we raise a dock up, the next season, when the water comes back in, we lose the dock. But that's a different issue. We're here today because we cannot access the lake. So we're within the same footprint of the original boardwalk, and there are several pictures that I've attached to the RDA. I don't know if you have them.
They have them in front of them.
Okay, great. Because of the condition of the original boardwalk, it became a danger. But we're within the same footprint, and I have a drawing of what the staircase will look. There'll be 3 platforms, one at the top of the staircase, one halfway down, and one at the bottom of the staircase. I just received this from my contractor, so I apologize for not providing it to the commission earlier. It's a much simpler staircase. We're looking for basically simple, stupid. We're not looking to do anything with telephone poles or, fancy boardwalk. But we do need your permission to go forward with the project. And we will be mitigating with bushes on each side of the staircase to mitigate the erosion. And at this point in time, one of our neighbors told us that people were on the property, even though there's erosion control, when there's only, they were going down to the lake down the hill. So we're like in a serious situation where a trespasser could, even in this condition, be injured. So we'd like to get back to work.
Hey, Chad, you want me to offer up?
Yeah.
anything?
Yeah, Drew, would you like to offer any comments?
Sure. So most of the project has been explained by the applicant. The way this came about is work had begun on replacing the stairway. There's no question about the need to replace the stairway. It's just jurisdiction was not, the homeowner was not aware of the type of jurisdiction associated with this property, which is inland bank. You can see on the plan where it delineates top of bank. It's a fairly steep bank, probably anywhere from a 4-to-1 to 3-to-1 slope, and some maybe even 2-to-1 as you get down towards the bottom of the bank where it meets the shoreline. So the pre-existing stairway, as you could see photos in their packet, had been seriously dilapidated. But it had been since removed when our department was made aware of the work, and new construction of a stairway had already begun at that time. And as a result of that, we had put a cease work order on it and informed the homeowner that they had to go through this process to effectively retroactively permit. And since that time, there was also, the property owner was informed that they had to go to the building department to make sure that the new stairway meets building code. So all of that has since taken place. When the construction had first begun, there was a lot of disturbed area along the bank outside of the footprint of the previously existing stairway, so that's why vegetation is proposed to stabilize that area. It is a steep bank, and it should be restabilized, so this vegetation is offered up to accomplish that. And not really much else to say. It was just one of those situations that we brought the homeowner and the situation, informed the homeowner of jurisdiction, and brought this situation into compliance with the Local Wetlands Protection Act and the State Wetlands Protection Act. So that has since been done. Building department, I don't know if they have comments from Caitlin, if you want to read them.
The building department comments are that the project will require a building permit and inspections.
Just to make sure the design is safe. Nothing more to add, and we'll recommend a negative determination with the condition of mitigation plantings as proposed.
Thank you, Drew. Questions and comments from the commissioner? Hearing none, is there anyone in the audience or on the phone who has a comment or question pertaining to the project?
Nobody on the phone, and nobody asking any questions from the audience.
In that case, we'll entertain a motion. This is an RDA with a recommended condition.
I would move in regards to the application of Dennis Shields at 51 Santuit Lane, a negative determination with a condition of the planting as called out.
Thank you. Do I hear a second?
Second?
Thank you. Voting. Don.
Aye.
Brian.
Yes.
Paul.
Yes.
Brad.
Yes.
Vote aye as well. Motion carried.
Thank you.
Negative is good, by the way.
Oh, I was wondering.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
I'm
In
an
this
attorney,
case-
and a negative's never good when you're in a courtroom.
In this case,
That means you're
it's good.
denied.
Don't worry.
Okay, all right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, we're ready. Chad?
Thank you, Drew. Now calling the 606 hearing hearing for Alex Kesselman, trustee, the 27 Sandollar Lane nominee trust, 27 Sandollar Lane. Proposed relocation and expansion of existing pier, ramp, and float. Representative is Cape and Islands Engineering. This is an NOI.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Matt Costa, Cape and Islands Engineering, representing the applicant. We're here tonight under a notice of intent application to rebuild the existing dock. Drew has it pulled up on the screen. You can see circled in blue. The existing site has existing dock now with a square float at the end, and then a jet ski float attached to that. You can see surrounding docks in the area, and it's right at the entrance to a little dead-end waterway off of Aquay Bay. The existing dock is it's old style construction where they would build the boardwalk very close to the salt marsh. We're proposing to remove that entire structure and to rebuild a new structure to current design standards. It will be elevated above the marsh. It will have through-flow decking. It will provide the adequate 5-foot clearance near mean high water for fishing, fouling access. If you look closely at your plan, you can see the end of the existing float, which is not shaded. The proposed float is all shaded in the brown. The existing float end is where Drew's identifying it on the plan. You can see the soundings around that float. Those soundings represent depths at mean low water, and there's very, very little water there. We're proposing to, as part of this rebuild, to push that float out, keeping the same float size and ramp size. We're going to extend the fixed pier a little further into the waterway to gain some additional depth around that float. This project has been reviewed by the Harbormaster and by the Shellfish Constable. The Shellfish Warden. The Shellfish Warden has recommended shellfish mitigation for this project because we are expanding this pier, and we agree with that. I did jump ahead a little bit. So your resource areas for this project include land under the ocean, land containing shellfish, the salt marsh, and land subject to coastal storm flowage. This project will result in a net environmental benefit. And we do believe it meets the performance standards as we have articulated in our narrative, and we are respectfully requesting you issue an order of conditions. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Matt. Drew, commentary?
Yeah, I'm just going to go back to the PowerPoint for a moment. Just show you some images of the site. So top left image here is looking at the property from the end of Sandollar, the cul-de-sac at the end of the road. Driveway dips down to the single-family house. Top right, looking at the existing landscaping and hardscaping going out to the bordering vegetated wetland here, salt marsh beyond that, and the existing fixed pier. There's a couple of other photos to show the general area around the fixed pier. It's pretty well separated from the neighboring dock, so navigation shouldn't be an issue, and that's been expressed by our harbor master that he has no concerns about navigation when it comes to this particular proposal. And just a few more images standing out at the end of the fixed pier looking back at the property is a pretty substantial salt marsh shelf here, and then you've got the bordering vegetated wetland associated with the edge of salt marsh here. And then as Matt had referred to, this is this existing design is very, very close to not very far elevated above the salt marsh. And so you can't really tell from this picture, but you can see what happens here is you don't get as robust growth of salt marsh grass as Spartina when you've got this kind of low-lying fixed pier situation. Sunlight penetration is very minimal, and that does have an impact on the salt marsh grass. So the fact that it's being rebuilt and raised up with the composite deck rating will certainly improve this condition here, allowing more sunlight to penetrate and allowing for more robust Spartina growth as a result. So the Shellfish Warden, I don't know if you want to, Caitlin, you want to read his comments.
Sure. After surveying the area, I found a moderate amount of shellfish resources in the area. I would recommend substantial siltation curtains for this project due to the muddy nature of the bottom in this area. Heavy siltation in an area has the potential to smother existing shellfish stocks in a wide area around the project locus. I would also recommend the shellfish mitigation fee for the project. The calculation is as follows, and the fee ends up being at $1,128.
Thank you.
Oh, excuse me, $1,276 is the total fee. Want me to read the Harbormaster? You want me to read the Harbormaster?
Yeah, sure.
And the Harbormaster comments are, he found that increasing the length of the dock by 30 feet doesn't interfere with navigation in this waterway. Due to the narrow and shallow water, only smaller vessels can access beyond on the dock, and by decreasing the channel width by 30 feet, there still remains over 100 feet of distance to the next dock across the waterway. And we have not received any Division of Marine Fisheries comments regarding this project as of yet.
They could come before, we have 21 days, as the commission is aware, statutorily, to issue an order of conditions from the close of a hearing, and I would anticipate receipt of that comment letter from Marine Fisheries during that time period. We should be receiving it soon. Their typical comments are related to sunlight penetration through a fixed pier, and I think with the through-flow grading, that will be accomplished. And other typical recommendations from Marine Fisheries, involve the timelines of when you're working, siltation control, low, high tides, things like that, just to reduce impact into the coastal resource areas. No other comments?
Thank you, Drew. Questions and comments from the commissioners?
Doesn't appear to be any.
Pretty straight.
Hearing none, we'll turn to the audience and anyone who may have called in.
Nobody from the audience and nobody has called in.
Very well. In that case, I'll entertain a motion. This is an NOI.
I would move the negative determination, no, I'm sorry, close an issue in regards to the application of Alex Pesselman, trustee at 27 Sandollar Lane, with the conditions around encapsulating the float, adding composite grading to stimulate growth of the seagrass, and mitigation shellfish formula needs to be used.
Thank you. Do I hear a second?
Aye.
You got a second, then we can vote.
That was a second, correct?
That was a second, yeah.
Thank you. Any discussion?
Aye.
Voting. Tom.
Aye.
Brian.
Yes.
Paul.
Yes.
Brad.
Yes.
I vote aye as well. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. All set, Chad.
All right. Thank you, Drew. Now calling the 609 hearing for Robert Mowray, 172 Daniels Island Road, proposed construction of the secondary previous driveway. Representative is the homeowner. This is Nardia. If the homeowner could please come to the microphone and identify themselves for the record.
Good evening, folks. So in front of you, you can see my home, highlighted in blue. And coincidentally, it's just opposite the one we just reviewed. In the plan that you showed in front of you, in the top right-hand corner of the lot, there's an existing pre-disturbed vegetated area. And there are maybe 2 or 3 native inkberry bushes, and the rest are non-native plants. And the proposed plan is to place a permeable or pervious driveway with a cobbled edge, as you can see in the drawing, by removing the existing vegetation and by revegetating on either side of the driveway, one on the top to provide a screen and on the bottom to provide a break between the top and the lower driveway areas. If you look at the map, you'll see there's a dashed line marked 50 feet from the coastal bank. And so the proposed area for the new driveway is within the 50 to 100-foot zone. Some of the existing vegetation, actually the 2 or 3 inkberry bushes that are currently in the bed, we'd like to use to place in the lower bed in the drawing, closer to the coastal bank. That's another pre-disturbed area, existing vegetation, and the goal in the lower bed is to plant more native plants as part of mitigation for this work. It's currently full of non-native plantings. I think that's about it.
Thank you. Drew, comment?
Yeah, pretty straightforward application, not too much to add to it. As the homeowner mentioned, project is contained within the 50 to 100-foot setback to top of coastal bank in an area that's essentially existing landscape bed with some native material and mostly ornamental material, which in the native material he has offered up to either transplant or replace in other areas around the property. Driveway is to be of a pervious nature, and there is no impact, as you can see, from the location of the coastal bank, which again is a vertical landform coastal bank. It is not a sediment source bank associated with salt marsh. So it is a vertical buffer to storm damage as its primary function, and no part of this project will interrupt that standard, that performance standard or function. So I recommend a negative determination.
Thank you, Drew. Questions and comments from the commissioner?
Drew, do you have any pictures of the home?
Oh, yes, sorry.
Hearing none, other questions and comments from the audience or anyone who was called in?
Just going over some photos first, Chad.
Oh, sorry about that.
No worries. So, top left here is the image of the existing home, existing driveway. This is the area on the top right of where the proposed parking lot is. Here are some of the inkberry shrubs, and then you've got a variety of ornamentals in here. So it's a pretty disturbed landscape condition in this buffer zone area of the coastal bank. And looking at the opposite side of the property, this is just beyond over the other side of the retaining wall is the existing driveway. There you can see the garage. So you can see you've got bordering vegetated wetland. This is the coastal bank right here. And then you've got salt marsh right here. So just another shot here on the bottom right. Again, there's the home, this is the bank, and this is the BVW and salt marsh area. So the proposed area for the project for the secondary driveway is well separated from these resource areas. No impact to those resource areas as a result. And that's why I make a recommendation for a negative determination.
And the Board of Health comments are as follows. Septic components located under a driveway must be rated H20 for vehicle loading. Leaching must be vented if located under driveway.
So you'll want to talk to the Board of Health prior.
So explain that again, please.
Septic components located under a driveway must be rated H20 for vehicle loading. Leaching must be vented if located under a driveway. So I would just discuss it with them.
We don't know where your septic is located as far as this proposed driveway, if it's underneath your existing driveway or wherever it is. If any part of it happens to be under this driveway, you need to talk to the Board of Health about that.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Drew and Caitlin. Questions and comments from the commissioners?
Well, good.
No comments.
No comment.
Very well. Hearing none, is there anyone in the audience or on the phone that needs to make comment or ask a question?
Nobody on the phone and nobody is raising questions in the audience.
Very well. We'll entertain a motion. This is a RDA.
I would move for negative determination in regards to the application of Robert S. Maury at 172 Daniels Island Road for a proposed construction of some secondary pervious driveways.
Thank you, Brad. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you. Voting. Tom.
Aye.
Brian.
Yes.
Paul.
Yes.
Brad.
Yes.
Vote aye as well. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Whenever you're ready, Chad, we can call the next hearing. It has been requested to be continued, so.
Right, sir. Now calling the 612 hearing for Mark R. and Robin L. Galante, 164 Captain's Row, proposed relocation of existing home and construction of single-family home, hardscape and landscape modifications, and septic upgrades. Representative is J.E. Landers Colley, continued from 10/14 and has requested to be continued once again. This is an NOI.
Yeah, the requested continuance date is to November 18th at 6 p.m.
Any reason given?
He is being tested for COVID. We don't want him here.
Well, it's a pretty good reason.
This is for the next one.
This is, do I hear a motion?
What's that?
I thought this is for the next one after that.
Chairman's requested a motion for a continuance request.
Okay, let's move on the application of Mark R. and Robin L. Galante, 164 Captain's Row, to continue this application to 11/18 at 6 p.m.
Thank you, Brad. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Now voting. Tom.
Aye.
Brian.
Yes.
Paul.
Yes.
Brad.
Yes.
I vote aye as well. Motion carries.
Thank you. Caitlin has passed out the plans for the next project, so, next hearing, so whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Drew. Now calling the 615 hearing for Frederick C. Mercier III, trustee, Mercier Nominee Trust, 254 Monomoskoye Road, proposed replacement of existing pier, bulkhead, and section of marine railway. Representative, Cape and Islands Engineering, continued for 10/14 for the Shellfish Constable review. This is an NOI.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Matt Costa, Cape and Islands Engineering, representing the applicant. We're here tonight under a notice of intent application to rebuild existing bulkhead and fixed pier. Drew has the site pulled up on the screen. See, it's located on Monomoskoye Road. The existing site, your resource areas for the site include land under the ocean, land containing shellfish, and land subject to coastal storm flowage. The existing site has right now a licensed, recently licensed in the last few years, licensed fixed pier, bulkhead, and float system. You can see that there's 3 floats, 1 long float next to the fixed pier, and then 2 finger floats extending out. We're proposing to rebuild the fixed pier portion, the 10x40 pier, and rebuild the existing bulkhead. The bulkhead will be replaced with a vinyl sheet pile style bulkhead with the appropriate tiebacks. There will be some new pilings installed, and old piles replaced, new piles installed for the existing fixed pier. And then the area, there will be some disturbance with this activity, and the area behind the bulkhead will be replanted in accordance with Mashpee's lawn standards, and more specifically with some salt-tolerant grasses, because this is a very low site and it can have a tendency to get inundated on storm surges. Also, as part of this project, this very unique to this site, and there's actually 2 other sites in Montmesquieu Road that have similar features, a marine railway. This is actually a licensed structure dating back prior to the 50s. It isn't in current use, but he does want to maintain the rights for that railway, and it is deteriorating on the upland side. As part of this application, we're proposing to rebuild a portion of that railway up in the upland area. No work is being proposed in the salt marsh or below mean high water with regard to the railway. The rebuilding of the dock and the existing bulkhead does meet all the applicable performance standards as we have outlined in our narrative. We've had this project reviewed by the Harbormaster and by Shellfish Constable. Harbormaster had a favorable review. Shellfish did recommend shellfish mitigation for this project. We disagree with that. We have spent some time recently discussing shellfish mitigation with Drew and Caitlin. We've drafted a methodology that we hope someday would get discussed and finalized and published so that other consultants and applicants, property owners in general, can have an idea of what they're dealing with regard to the shellfish mitigation. The regulation cited for the mitigation of the piers is Reg 3, Part A, 9, Section P, and that specifically states that when an applicant seeks to construct a new dock, in parentheses, or enlarge an existing dock, and it goes on to explain that the commission has the rights to require mitigation. We're rebuilding an existing licensed structure here. We are not enlarging it in any way. We feel that shellfish mitigation is an undue burden to the applicant because they are not asking for anything outside what they legally have now. We open that up to discussion and would enjoy some feedback on that. Barring that, we do request that you issue an order of conditions. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Matt. Drew, comment?
Okay. So, in regards to, I'll just start off by addressing the shellfish comments. In regards to shellfish, I would recommend that the applicant have a direct discussion with Shellfish Constable about his recommendation. All other aspects of the project meet the performance standards for the applicable resource areas. Just for the applicant's benefit, I did have a brief discussion with the Shellfish Constable this morning in regards to his recommendation, and what that discussion involved is, yes, you're not expanding the footprint of this dock, but you are causing a disturbance as a result of reconstruction and effectively building a new dock in replacement of this existing dock. In regards to mitigation and citing specific areas of the regulation that specify what the commission could or could not recommend, it is at their discretion to recommend mitigation at any point in time for any project that they feel, in the interest of the Wetlands Protection Act and the values associated with it and the resource areas involved, it is indeed at their discretion. Whether you are provided advance notice of this or not is really not the subject at hand. What is the subject at hand is the jurisdiction that the commission has under the Wetlands Protection Act and their discretion to require or recommend or take the recommendation of other staff into account when it comes to the decision-making process. So I'm going to leave it at that. They don't have to tie their decisions or mitigations or requirements or conditions to specific regulatory language. It is indeed at their discretion. As long as they can make a case that this ties into the values associated with the resource areas, I think that that's justification enough. If you disagree with that, you can have a discussion with it. That's my input when it comes to projects like this. And yes, we'll indeed get to a point in time where we'll have these things kind of finalized and more ultimately promulgated. It hasn't happened yet. That doesn't preclude the commission from requiring mitigation in the meantime. So, in regards to the project as proposed, it was mentioned that the portion of the marine railway is to be rebuilt. And I did inquire as to whether or not there was anticipated use, and the response I got is no. There would be no anticipated use in the remaining section. And I'll show you some images of the site. Here is the existing home, shot from the road, top left, top right, the existing conditions leading out to the fixed pier and retaining wall. This is the area of marine railway that's proposed to be rebuilt. And you can see its continuation here through the salt marsh. So the concern I have here, and I believe it's already been addressed, but I wanted to make sure the commission is aware of it and have a discussion about how this should be reflected in an order of conditions should one be issued for this project, is this portion of marine railway, whether or not it's going to be used and how to condition that. I mean, we've gotten an answer from the consultant saying that it's not going to be used, but we don't know for a fact. So my recommendation would be that a condition be put into an order if this project were approved that it would require some sort of amendment or new permit if it was anticipated to be used, because this area is all salt marsh. That's going to involve impact to salt marsh, and that should be brought before the commission before that use is put into place. So that will be a recommended condition for this aspect of the project. Looking at other photos here of the site, you can see this is the existing bulkhead. It's one of those old railroad tie bulkheads that is in a seriously dilapidated state, and there's no question it needs to be replaced. And then you've got the existing fixed pier here. Bottom right photo shows the existing fixed pier platform leading up to the fixed pier, and then you've got a couple of finger floats coming out from the fixed pier portion here. These floats, as you can see, and this is another recommendation, I had a discussion with the consultant on this, that they're all exposed styrofoam, so as a condition of approval, these would all be encapsulated as part of this dock rebuild. I think you already read the Shellfish and Harbormaster Comments?
Yes. The Shellfish Comments is as follows. After surveying this location, I have found that not many substantial shellfish stocks currently exist in the area, but it is identified as good habitat with a strong potential for shellfish stock. I would also propose a shellfish mitigation fee for this project. The calculation is as follows, which brings the total mitigation fee to $1,926.40. The Harbormaster Comments, he had no comments due to the fact it was a rebuild. Division of Marine Fisheries comments are as follows. The existing shoreline structures as well as proposed additional sheet piles are mostly vertical structures that provide minimal fisheries habitat, pose potential erosion impacts to bordering habitat from deflection of wave energy, and act as a barrier to future landward migration of existing salt marsh habitat. This proposed removal of existing structures for maintenance purposes is an opportunity to replace vertical structures with soft solutions and/or sloping riprap set landward of existing walls to provide more natural habitats like the undisturbed bordering salt marsh shown in the Appendix H site photographs. The proposed replacement of sloping riprap with vertical sheet piles in particular should instead consider marsh plantings or their soft solutions to protect this section of the property. If the proposed structures are approved, construction should occur from the upland side of the property to the maximum extent feasible to minimize direct impacts to bordering salt marsh habitat. Board of Health comments. Take notice of the location of the septic system to not damage it with large vehicles driving over it. And there's a butter concern at 256 Monomoskoye Road. They would prefer to have no boats docked in front of their property. And that's it.
Excuse me,
No
Mr.
other comments, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Drew. Thank you, Caitlin. Questions and comments from the commissioners?
Drew, I'd like to question the want to understand what you suggested here, which should be a condition, and that is in regards to, are you simply saying that you would like the applicant to return to this commission if they intend to actually begin work on the railroad?
Yeah, I haven't really figured out what the right wording for the condition would be. I think that just because that section of the railroad runs right through established salt marsh, that it should at the very least be an amended order request because it is within an extension of the footprint of the portion they are proposing to restore. But any sort of use in this type of scenario of that remaining portion of marine railway is going to have to be conditioned, so I don't think it should come in as an RDA or administrative approval request. I think
Why
it should
isn't
come
it
in
split out as a separate project? If they get to the point where they want to invest in a railroad and to go through what has to be done to do that, they come back with another request.
I agree entirely. Whether, I was throwing out there, what I don't think would be appropriate for a request, and I don't think it would be the subject of an RDA or administrative approval. I think it would either have to be an amended order. Obviously, it would require, a revised, a new plan showing what they're proposing to do. If indeed it comes to that, I don't know. I was simply told that it's not anticipated to be used as part of what's presented here tonight, but it still raises concerns. As far as if it is to be used, well, we don't know anything about it at this stage of the proposal, so we can only assume that it is not intended to be used. So that justifies a condition to require them to come back before the commission through a permit request if and when that use occurs.
I mean, there are other railroads along various rivers around Monomoskoy, or waterways, I should say. And have they included in their situation now? So if they
No,
want
this is the first one I've seen.
But there are others.
I think there are, yeah. As Matt had said, there are others in existence.
Little River, I noted, have some.
Yeah.
Been there a long time, and they look like they're in disuse as well.
Right.
But, I'm just trying to figure out how we do that, is whether we say that take that condition of that railroad out of the approval here, and then come back to us with another project.
You mean the portion that they're asking included in tonight's, or just the portion that's running through the salt marsh below that? So this is the area that is part of tonight's proposal. Nothing below here is being restored, or there's no work proposed in this area. So that's what I'm saying is, because this area here, this footprint, it's outside the salt marsh, it's relatively innocuous. I'll show you the photo again of that particular site. Here it is.
Yep.
So you've just got primarily upland. Granted, it's within the 50-foot buffer to the salt marsh here, but restoring this is really, you're not getting into the salt marsh at all. Doesn't mean it shouldn't be conditioned for, runoff control, erosion control during construction, which would be typically a boilerplate in that kind of scenario. But from this point down towards the water is not part of any proposal tonight. And because it is all one marine railway structure, that's why I recommend that condition, that if they were planning on using this structure and not planning on coming back to the commission to show what sort of disturbance is happening outside of what you see on the plan tonight, they should be required to do that as a condition of this permit. Because it's all salt marsh, as you can see right here. You can see the railway lines going through, but this is all firmly established salt marsh. So if there's going to be disturbance there, they should come back to the commission with a permit request if that is the case.
Okay, gotcha.
That's my recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, may I address some questions?
Sure.
So with regard to the railway, you can see in that picture right there that it couldn't be used right now. The railroad ties are most likely disintegrated underneath. He doesn't want to lose the right for it. This is a licensed structure. I would disagree that he needs permission to use it. I would agree that any disturbance to salt marsh would need to be permitted. I think that what we're proposing here is well within the regulations and does meet the performance standards, and we would accept a condition of future use being reviewed and approved by the commission. So I think that should suffice. With regard to the shellfish mitigation, so I think it's an appropriate discussion to have, because it's the boards that's making the commission that's making the decision here. It's not the Shellfish constable. Constable's making a recommendation to you. When it first came about, they were going to start requiring mitigation for docks and rebuilding of docks. It was the Reg 3 that was cited and the rationale for doing that. And what we're asking for is that we have a discussion about this, because this is a new policy that the board is taking up, and that applicants and their consultants should have an idea of when to expect this, or more appropriately, when to include it ahead of time in their filing. You know, if we're going to be requiring mitigation for all waterway construction, I don't disagree with that. But I think it would be good to have the board come out and say that at a public hearing. We don't want to have to guess on when mitigation is going to be required and when it isn't. If the regulation that was cited at the time that this discussion was first kicked off does specify new docks and enlarged docks, then that was the mindset we were in on it. And, you know, that's how we got to this point. I think it's appropriate to have a discussion and to get some feedback from the commission if this is going to be an ongoing condition. If we're to expect this in the future, every time we go to rebuild a dock, whether we're enlarging it or rebuilding an existing licensed structure, I think it's appropriate that the commission give some feedback at a public hearing on this. This is not something we're going to continue the hearing for or walk away from it. I think the fees that the constable calculates are very reasonable. And in part, he uses a part of the methodology that we provided and have been in discussion with. So I don't disagree with the commission having the ability to require mitigation as they essentially see fit. But I think it would be good for you to make a public statement about when this would be required for docks. So that's what I'm asking for.
Sue, would you like a chance to respond, or is the statement, are you happy letting the commissioners respond?
I would like to hear some commissioner feedback. I mean, I think I've made my recommendation and my stance on this pretty clear, that, you know, whether you base it on the values associated with the resource areas listed under both the local and state wetlands protection acts, you know, to offer up kind of a across the board, yes, we will do this, no, we won't do this, yes, we will require this, no, we won't require this. And, you know, we try to get out, I think, as best we can, what the expectations are, but that's really the whole point of the hearing, is to kind of hash things out. It's not meant to be or anticipated to be the final decision-making process. It's an ongoing process and an ongoing discussion. I don't think the commission should be held to a standard that you have to let every applicant know what to expect before every hearing, because every situation is different. Feedback varies from project to project, so I don't think that's a really realistic expectation of the commission. What I do hope the commission would do is look at the values of the resource areas involved and make their recommendations or follow our recommendations based on what's best for the resource area, based on the impact of a proposed project, which varies from site to site. I won't say any more about that. I do also strongly recommend that if the applicant has an issue with the calculated formula or the recommendation from the Shellfish Constable before this commission, they should have a conversation with the constable. And to my knowledge, that hasn't taken place for this particular hearing. Want that?
Thank you, Drew.
request to continue.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I say if that conversation is to take place, then that would probably warrant a continuance, if that's what the applicant's representative wishes to do.
Mr. Chairman, may I speak?
Yes.
Yeah, so we just received the information yesterday, the day before, or maybe even it was today, I'm not even sure. It's all blurred together. I think it was actually today. I haven't had a chance to review it with Donovan. I have talked to Donovan about a methodology for doing this. I'm not asking for you guys to tell us what you're going to say about projects, what you're going to require. I'm asking that for this new policy that you're taking up and requiring mitigation for shoreline work, for work in the water, for rebuilding docks, just give us some feedback now. We have 2 scenarios that were before you tonight, and there'll be another one after this, where you're enlarging structures. All the previous applications before this that had required mitigation, at least handled by my firm recently, were all enlarging docks. This is the first one where we're not enlarging the dock, and the mitigation's being required. I think it's prudent that we just have a discussion about that, and it could be helpful moving forward.
Matt, and please someone correct me if I'm wrong, but the sticking point here is that the impact to the salt marsh has changed whether or not the marine railway is in use or it is not, and there is also impact based on the replacement, and that's what we're looking to exercise. We could possibly be exercising our prerogative on to require the mitigation. The case-by-case nature of permitting in general necessitates that we can't really have a blanket approach for everything in many cases. As convenient as that would be for us, let alone the applicants, there is reason that the commission has prerogative to exercise their own judgment.
Yes, just to be clear, though, there is no work associated with the railway in the water at all. This all has to do with the rebuilding of the existing licensed structure.
The Shellfish Constable's comments are based on that aspect of this project, not the marine railway.
Correct.
Other questions and comments from the commissioners?
I would think it would take some discussion among parties, including the representative, and we ought to table it, set it aside, go off and work the issue and be able to come back, because if this is only the beginning of what could be other issues like this, we really ought to resolve it before this individual is allowed to go forward.
I would just also point out that, and I don't disagree with that, but if you look at Regulation 27, under the mitigation section, Regulation 27 deals with docks and piers in all manner, new rebuilds, modification, amendments. It covers all the bases. And there is a section entitled mitigation, where this is an option that the commission can invoke. In addition to upland mitigation, it doesn't say a specific square footage. It doesn't tie it to looking at, it's discretionary is what I'm saying. It's not specific to a particular scenario because the scenarios vary in reality. So that's why it's worded as such. To open it up to your discretion. So I just want to remind the commission that that language is in there. That was vetted out. That was promulgated at a public meeting. If you need to go back and read it again to understand exactly what the meaning of that mitigation section is, I highly recommend that you do that, because it's worded specifically to invoke your discretion based on what you see before you and the anticipated impacts thereof. Whether it's upland mitigation or whether it's shellfish mitigation, and if we as staff believe that there's better opportunity to have a shellfish mitigation fee than upland mitigation in a particular scenario, then we rely heavily on the Shellfish Constable's input. So I just want to remind the commission that language is in there. It has been in there for a few years. It's nothing new. What Matt is getting to is the discussion on, a calculation formula that unfortunately myself, staff, with the Shellfish Constable haven't had time to sit down and do, but we will. We are going to have that discussion. But I think it's important to point out the existing language in the regulation and how it's worded. And I'm fine, I highly recommend, additional discussion on it, but I just want to put that out there for your knowledge, that it's in there, and it presents an option for you at your discretion, based on what you anticipate the impacts to be, short or long-term, on any given project. It's your option. That's why it's worded as such, that's why it's in there, that's why it was promulgated. So, I'll leave it at that. No other comments.
Thank you, Jim. Comments and questions from the commissioners?
Nope.
Hearing none, we'll entertain is there further commentary from the public or on the phone or from the applicant's representative?
Nobody on the phone, nobody from the audience. I don't know if the applicant's representative wishes to speak more.
Yeah, we'll accept the shellfish mitigation. We're not looking to continue this hearing. I wasn't asking for the methodology. I was just simply asking for feedback if this is something you think you were going to do on existing piers. That's all I was asking for. Not getting into the weeds on the details. That's something we do need to have a discussion for. And you're well within your rights to require mitigation on most any project. So just to clarify, thank you.
Thank you, Matt. If there's no more questions or commentary, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Absolutely.
I seem to have heard somewhere in the hearing that there was a concern of an abutter having a boat in front of their property. Could we have some clarification on that?
Sure, I mean, oh, sorry, go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, it was the owners of 254. They haven't submitted any comments after the fact. This was back on October 12th. It has to do, we would prefer to have no boats docked in front of our property. Our dock has no boat in the picture they provided. It would be tight for us if a boat was docked at the Mercier property as shown in this photo. So it's read into record. It's really a matter of use of docks and a navigation
Doesn't
concern
really
more
have
than.
bearing on impacts to
Yeah.
wetlands. It's not really the commission's purview. But they could check, they could take it up with the Harbormaster if they wish. It's really his jurisdiction.
Just for the record, we did the license for this dock and the dock next door. They're both in the same exact license footprints. And the license for the applicant actually has a specific beam restriction for docking on that side of the float. So it's actually documented in his Chapter 91 license. So it's a Chapter 91 licensing issue.
Don't believe there's any other comments, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Drew. Once again, entertain a motion.
Well, I would move that we close an issue in regards to the application of Paul S. and Susan, no, I'm sorry, I skipped a page. Frederick C. Mercier, the third trustee for the Mercier Nominee Trust at 254 Monomoskoye, that we close an issue with the condition of enclosing the float appropriately, and that we adopt and use the shellfish formula as it stands today in our regulations, and that if and when the applicant desires to activate the railroad, that they return to the commission for further direction.
Thank you, Brad. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Second?
No, he asked for discussion.
Hearing none, we'll entertain a second from the vice chairman.
Yes, second.
Vote. Tom.
Aye.
Brian.
Yes.
Paul.
Yes.
Brad.
Yes?
I vote aye as well. Motion carries. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
If we're ready,
Yep.
Mr. Chairman.
Hey, thank you, Drew. Now calling the 618 for Paul F. and Susan M. Shankoff, 338 Monomoskoye Road. proposed replacement and expansion of floats and Vista Pruning. Representative, Cape and Islands Engineering, continued for 1014. This is number one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Matt Costa, Cape and Islands Engineering, representing the applicant, here tonight under a notice of intent application to enlarge the existing float and to permit a Vista corridor. Drew has it pulled up on the screen. This is actually an older aerial. This project was before the board a year or so ago for permitting a single-family dwelling. The dwelling is under construction. Your resource areas for this project include land under the ocean, land containing shellfish, salt marsh, BVW, and land subject to coastal storm flowage. We have an existing licensed pier. Drew has the plan pulled up on the screen. We're here proposing to remove the existing float and to replace it with two 18 by 24 floats and to relocate the two pilings. Also part of this application is the permitting of a Vista corridor. That's that trapezoid, black dash trapezoid shown on the screen. That does meet your regulations for Vista corridors and the rather convoluted formula of frontage and then percentage of the frontage and then 80% of that using for the back line. That's how you end up with that trapezoid. But the project, including the trapezoid and the pier, does meet the performance standards, and we are requesting that you issue an order of conditions. Again, this project was reviewed by the Harbormaster favorably and was reviewed by Shellfish. Shellfish did make a recommendation for mitigation, which we agree with and accept. With that, I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Matt. Drew, commentary?
The only comment I have on this is in regards to the Vista pruning. I have no issue with the corridor. It was calculated out as per our regulations. Regulation 29, buffer zones and buffer strips. The commission may recall, not all members, but this lot was subdivided. It was one lot at one time. And I did make this known to Mark in my comments about the existing pathway associated with the Vista pruning from the property next door before it was subdivided. I don't see it on the plan, not a big deal, but I'll just make my recommendations known when it comes to the Vista pruning as a condition of approval. So there was an existing Vista pruning corridor. It's very unusual. You had a house, you have a single-family home over here that came before the commission and issued an order of conditions with Vista pruning. One of the corridors extended off linearly from the property right through here. And there has since been a pathway created through here as part of that Vista pruning application that was issued an order of conditions. So it's not, I'm not talking about a violation of any kind. Since the lot was subdivided, now you've got another single-family home here, and you've got the pathway coming out to the existing dock and pier here, and you've got the Vista pruning shown. So this other corridor that was created is shown on a previous plan. I apologize, I should have put it up here as a basis of, just for your edification. But you can see the Vista corridor lines kind of shot across like this. So it was kind of an unusual Vista corridor situation, but it was tied to this property over here. No longer needed since the lots have been subdivided, but my recommendation is to have this kind of linear-shaped Vista corridor replanted. It's a path that just kind of runs parallel to the naturally vegetated buffer strip. Now they've got a new path as a result of this recently permitted single-family home, this dock and pier, and a pathway access to the water. So that would just be my only recommendation. I don't have any concerns about the float. I agree with the Shellfish Constable's recommendation for Shellfish Mitigation Fee. It's just this pathway that cuts through here really doesn't serve any purpose. It doesn't even provide access from this property through the naturally vegetated buffer strip. It was really access from the other property down here when this was all one lot.
It's the path, 6-foot path, right?
Yeah, it runs right through here. It's kind of like, it runs on this kind of line.
It's actually, we show it right, it's on the plan right there, 6-foot path. Right
Oh,
to-
there it is. Okay, sorry. My apologies.
Yeah, so a special condition to have that
Yeah, so
replanted.
special condition to revegetate that path, because it's just not needed anymore. And it runs through that naturally vegetated buffer, so that's my only recommendation on this, what's proposed. Shellfish Harbormaster.
Thank you, Drew. Comments and questions from the commissioner?
Caitlin's just going to read the comments from the Shellfish Constable and Harbormaster.
Of course, my apologies, Caitlin.
That's okay. The Shellfish Comments are as follows. After surveying the location, I have determined that shellfish resources exist in a substantial amount in the area of the proposed work. It is my belief that with the proper conditions outlined in the NOI, such as siltation curtains and work confined to the tidal swing around high tide, that the project can be completed without permanent destruction of shellfish stocks in the area. The site is also a candidate for the new Shellfish Mitigation Fee. The calculation brings the total proposed mitigation fee to $1,608.90. DMF had no comments, as no recommendations for sequencing, timing, or methods that would further avoid or minimize impact to resource areas at this time. The Board of Health just says to take notice of the location of the septic system to not damage it with large vehicles driving over it. And the Harbormaster said, I reviewed the plans for the flow alteration and found that the new float will not have any effect on navigation within the Great River, as the dock doesn't extend further onto the river and navigation won't be hindered. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. Questions and comments from the commission? Hearing none, are there any questions and comments from the audience or from anyone on the phone?
No questions.
Hearing none, we'll entertain a motion. This is an NOI.
I would move that we close an issue in regards to the application of Paul S. and Susan M. Scheinkoff at 338 Monomoskoye Road with the condition that the previously approved Vista corridor across the property be replanted with native vegetation.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Voting, Tom,
Aye.
Brian,
Yes.
Paul,
Yes.
Brad.
Yes.
I vote aye as well. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're good to go, Chad.
All right, thank you, Drew. Now calling the 621 hearing for Roger Brooks, applicant, 374 Monomoskoye Road. Proposed construction of home addition, cover over existing deck, and construction of a new deck. Owner of record, Richard J. Moreau, Sr., Revocable Trust. Representative is Down Cape Engineering. This is an idea.
Good evening, Chairman, members of the Commission. My name is Dan Ojala from Down Cape Engineering. I'm a land surveyor and civil engineer and helping the folks out with the improvements here in the audience. Roger's boss, Joao, is here if there's any questions of the builder. Should be a pretty straightforward matter. They did run it by the Conservation Administrator's Department and felt it was reasonable to file this as an RDA. It's a fairly minor project. We're bumping out the house just a little bit in the front. This is an existing dwelling. The resource areas include a salt marsh. There's a licensed bulkhead. It's kind of a neat site in that there's kind of managed uplands that go back quite a ways, almost the entire buffer. And then there's a small gazebo and lawn pretty much outside of the 100-foot buffer. You do have jurisdiction, though, because of the land subject to coastal storm flowage. So you like to pay attention to make sure that, FEMA requirements are met and that there's no, obstructions to storm flow and so forth. It's, again, we're bumping out the house a little bit. The deck and so forth is also being bumped out. but we're all working within an existing lawn area, so no new disturbance. There'll be a silt fence provided, pretty much just a little bit landward of the work area. There is a nice innovative alternative septic system already on the site. It's a microfast unit, and it pumps it way back over towards Monomoskoye Road. I think Doyle did all the planning a few years back, and Associates, and did a nice job with it. So again, the owner just needs a little bit more elbow room out front, no new bedrooms or anything, just a little bit more space on the levels. We'll fully comply with FEMA regulations, elevated up, flood vents to code. And I certainly would be glad to answer any questions if you have it. We did a little narrative discussing a few of the finer points. But again, pretty straightforward. Be glad to answer any questions if you have them. Thank you.
Thank you. Drew, comment?
Not much to add to it. Just to go over some photos of the site. The commissioners haven't been out there. This is the shot of the existing home coming off the driveway. Looking at one of the staking for the proposed addition deck. Facing out to the rear of the property. There's an existing gazebo here, some ornamental plantings, and then you've got a pretty robust buffer zone, as you can see here. This is standing on the edge of the grass, the bottom right photo taken on the other side of this arborvitae. To show you, you've got the existing boardwalk pathway cutting through. It's a pretty narrow lot, but on either side is all entirely native plantings. This is all groundsel bush or high tide bush. And you've got various coastal grasses in here, so a very robust buffer zone. Then looking back at the staking for the proposed deck, everything going over existing lawn. It is outside the 100-foot setback from salt marsh. I did have just one question of clarification for whomever did the wetland delineation. It's not impacting the project or my opinion of the project, but a high tide bush is an obligate species, and it's considered bordering vegetative wetland, and that wasn't delineated on the plan, so you may want to pass that on to that gentleman who did the surveying, that high tide bush is an obligate species and should be considered under the classification of bordering vegetative wetland. So that would put this within the 50, just outside the 50-foot, but again, I don't see any impact to the BVW, no impact to the salt marsh, and no elimination or no disturbance to native vegetation as it pertains to Reg 25 and land subject to coastal storm flow. As you can see, this is all over existing grass. And a lot of this was previously permitted when the home was rebuilt, so that's why a lot of this is existing mitigation for the reconstruction of this home, single-family home. So, no other comments.
Thank you, Drew. Questions and comments from the commission? Hearing none, are there questions or comments from the audience or anyone on the phone?
No, I have a couple comments to read into record, though. The Board of Health states that the property is not in a Zone 2 and is not serviced by a potable well. A Title V septic inspection must be performed if addition is proposed to be on a foundation. Floor plan to be reviewed upon submission to the building department. And the building department states that the project will require a written finding from ZBA.
Thank you, Caitlin. Questions and comments from the commissioners? Hearing none, we'll entertain a motion.
I'm sorry, this is 374 Monomoskoye.
Yes, RDX.
I would move that the application of Roger Brooks, 374 Monomoskoye Road, that we close, no, that we, this is a negative determination.
Thank you, Brad. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Now voting. Tom?
Aye.
Brian?
Yes.
Paul?
Yes.
Brad?
Yes.
I vote aye as well. Motion carries. Thank you.
Appreciate your time very much.
Thank you.
Drew.
green clip that got me confused.
What's that?
Good to go, Chad.
Thank you. Now calling to order the 624 hearing for Jody and Alexandria Symes, 30 Sandollar Lane, proposed demolition and reconstruction of single-family home with associated landscaping, hardscaping, and mitigation plantings. Representative is BSS Design. This is an NOI.
Before we get started, do you have the green cards, the butter?
That was going to be part of my introduction. I'm here and I didn't bring the cards. We could send them in. We can get them to you tomorrow.
Do you have received them?
Excuse me?
You have them, but they're not with you?
We have them at the office, yes.
Okay.
Is that, if that's okay with the commission? I don't have any issue with it.
We can certainly condition that if it needs be.
I'm sure they meet that condition very quickly.
We will.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, yeah, thank you for the record. My name is Tom Bunker with BSS Design, and with me is Andrew Garrelay of the Yarmouthport Design Group. We're representing Jody and Alexandra Symes at 30 Sandollar Lane, as Drew was circling with the hand there. See, it's at the end of Sandollar Lane, has a frontage of about 102 feet on Aquay Bay. Rather, you can see an odd-shaped lot, and the house currently, there's a house with a detached garage on it that's sort of backed up against the south property line. The driveway comes in from Sandollar Lane directly to the existing garage. And starting, the resource area is starting at Aquay Bay on the north side of the property. There's an expanse of salt marsh along there. It's in the flood zone, and then there's a slope up, some stone riprap. It's steeper than 10 to 1. It's actually also steeper than 4 to 1. So that's considered a coastal bank. It's not eroding, but it's certainly storm damage prevention. It is also covered with some native and some invasive vegetation along the entire length of that frontage. And then just inland, the land flattens where there's some lawn directly on the north side of the house, and over to the west end of the house is a nice synthetic putting green. And the southwest corner of the house, there's the soil absorption system, which was upgraded when in the 90s or so. It had a pump system put in to get it to just meet the 5-foot separation from groundwater in that location, but it is only about 44 feet from the salt marsh in that location. The heavy lines crossing through the site are the flood zone lines. There's AE elevation 12, which is all the lower lawn and half of the house or most of the house is in that flood zone AE 12. And then there is a band of the shaded X flood zone, which is not a hazard zone. And then above that, basically the garage and the upper level, which is around elevation 25, is in flood zone X. The house is certainly not more than 50 feet back from the coastal bank or the salt marsh. It's roughly only 8 feet from the salt marsh, or 8 feet from the coastal bank, and 16 feet from the salt marsh. At its closest point, that deck right in there. On the second, well, we have a limit of work running around there. I'll point out on this page that there are several trees to be removed, and one just to the north of the garage has a limit of work around it to protect it, a 24-inch oak tree in that location. On the proposed site plan, you see the house the house was designed to have the same footprint area as the existing house, but it was rotated counterclockwise so that it's more consistently is parallel to the south lot line. And doing that brought it away from the salt marsh, so it gained about 7 or 8 feet of clearance between the top of bank and salt marsh to the existing house. So it's moved away in that location, and the garage is basically the same size, same footprint and location as the existing garage. What I have here, the floor of the existing house is at elevation 9, which is 3 feet lower than the flood zone. And the floor of this house is at 13, which is 1 foot higher than the flood zone. This is the lowest floor. 13 is 1 foot higher than the flood zone, which is as required by the state building code to be a foot higher. And we have some retaining walls around on the water side of the house. The retaining wall is elevation 12, which is about a 4 foot high retaining wall. And on the west end of the house, the wall jumps up to elevation 17, and then going counterclockwise around the house, on the back side of the house, the retaining wall goes up again to 20 along the back of the house and up toward the garage. And these walls do have a specific purpose. They're for the state, to meet the state building code specifications, so that lowest level will not be considered a first floor, that it will be considered a basement, because otherwise, this is a 2.5-story house, but if that were considered a basement, it would be considered a 3.5-story house, which would violate zoning. The house is not taller because of this, or at least making this not keeping that lower floor a basement. The house is still not taller than 35 feet. I know this is a zoning issue, not a conservation issue, but that's just to explain why this grading is on here. It's been done on other properties I've seen, and it's just so that when there's a structure at a lower elevation in an area like this, there's some grading around it, so that they can have a 2.5-story house like others do. So the house is rotated away. It's the same coverage, but there is more coverage in the further areas away from the wetland, as was shown by the mitigation calculations, particularly up the steps going around the northeast corner around that, what's labeled the basement with porch above. There's some wide steps, stairs going up there, and some paved area. And then we also have a retaining wall north and east of the garage, and that is to house the septic tank and the septic system, which is on the street side of the garage, so that can flow by gravity. And so by putting the septic system up in that location, we've gained, I have to find the number here, but it's gained 9 feet more separation, vertical separation from the groundwater. And it also is, the existing is 44, and this is 82 feet from the salt marsh. So there's 38 more horizontal separation, 38 feet more horizontal separation, and the 9 more feet vertical separation for the septic system, which we feel is a plus for the environment. Andrew Garrelay has drawn up the Yarmouth Port Design Group plan. If you have that on there, there's much more native shrub habitat, or shrub and tree habitat, which than existing. So maybe Andrew can talk about that part for you.
Before we get into that, just want to separate the two out in case the commissioners have any questions on what you just presented. Before we get into the landscaping, an opportunity for questions on what Tom just presented,
Okay.
if there are any questions. If not, we can move on to mitigation.
I'm good.
Shall I proceed?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay.
Just checking to see if anyone had any questions on that portion of the presentation.
Okay, yeah, so this was kind of a complicated one in order to meet the criteria on all those zoning issues, which is why we wound up with so much wall around the house, as Tom explained so well and saved me from having to do so. So what's left is, pretty straightforward. Now, Tom did mention about some tree removal. There is, at the west end of the house, there's a non-native Kuza dogwood that's coming out, and also where the kind of the northeast section of the house where it says basement below, and the stairs are coming around. There's, where am I? I'm sorry. No, I got to bring you back toward the existing garage. The existing garage, you can see the two red X's in the septic tank. Yeah, if you can barely make out, but in gray below that, there's an existing timber, pressure-treated timber wall that those two trees are right up against, in order to get that septic tank over into that area. And this allows us to have a gravity flow septic system coming out of the house. I was able to put a wall around that area, and obviously those got displaced, which is regrettable, but part of it. And, oh yeah, and then where I mentioned before, a little bit on the northeast corner of the house where it says porch above, basement below, there's a red X in there too, where there's an 8-inch existing cedar, almost the middle of your screen. Yep, right there. So I've shown that tree restoration at the top of the page of what trees are coming out, and proposed mitigation for those trees below. And those trees will be located, 2 eastern red cedars, right near where the hand was, right by that big black square. Yeah, so I have 2 eastern red cedars there, and on the western side of the property, I have the red oaks and another cedar over in that direction as well. And let's see, yeah. So you can see them along that property line there. And we did mitigation, I did mitigation calculations here that required a total of 385 square feet, but we're giving up he's giving up that putting green that's over there, and we're really committing that whole end of the property that's, very close to the salt marsh and coastal bank for restoration. And also, there's an existing planting bed along the waterfront that has some ornamentals in it that we're going to switch out for bayberry and Comptonia peregrina and some creeping juniper. And as mentioned a little bit, that we do have some mixed strata with the trees, and also on that western end of the property, there's some larger shrubs, winterberry and northern bayberry. It's not all creeping low stuff, but right in front of the walkout basement, we do have low stuff where we should put a Vista corridor in at some point. And also, I've got some bayberry near where that cedar tree was being removed. You can see around that that oak that Tom mentioned that's being preserved, the 24-inch oak. There's a number of bayberries shown in green. I showed the native restoration plants in green, so you can differentiate between the ornamentals. And then, of course, ornamental plants around the house. I don't know that I need to explain those too much unless you request me to. That's pretty much where we are. There's existing lawn where most of that displacement is. Yeah, in the back, but on the western end, we had that putting green, but there's also a big area of English ivy that is being removed, and that's where some of that mitigation planting is going. So all in all, we're showing 1,500 square feet of mitigation. It's actually more than that. I rounded it down, and the tree restoration. So I guess I can leave it for questions.
Okay, Jim, do you have commentary?
I don't know.
Okay. I'll go back to the PowerPoint. Just to show some images of the site. There's a lot going on, so let's do the existing site conditions. So, top left, this is the existing garage, and then you see that drainage easement on the plan adjacent to the garage, so that's this location here. SAS spray painted on the asphalt so that they can get an indication where that soil absorption system is going. There's the cedar tree. Is that the one that's slated to be this one, or is that?
No,
No.
I think that's a U that's underneath the oak, yeah.
That's right. Yeah, okay. Looking at this bottom left shows this side, the upland side of the house. As you can see, it's almost all existing hardscaping. You've got a lot of hardscaping, steps, bricks, pavers along this whole stretch along the back. Looking out on the opposite side of the garage, the bottom right, that's taken from over here, showing more existing hardscaping patio area adjacent to the garage. This is a shot of the landscaping in between the single-family home over here, garage over here. You can see some of that English ivy. That's also prevalent in other areas of the property. There's the cedar.
Yes.
Yep. And coming off the deck here, looking into the backyard, you can see some of the staking for the proposed footprints of the rebuilt home. This staking here on the right side photo shows, right here is along the top of the coastal bank. And I think this is work limit, I believe, this staking here. And then you can see existing lawn in between the single-family home and top of coastal bank. Another shot here looking out from the fixed pier towards the property, so you can't really tell, but this bank is actually all riprap stone. It's just grown over with native vegetation over the years, so it is an armored bank. Top right again, showing some of the existing vegetation. This is the bottom left is the existing putting green. That'll all be covered over with the proposed mitigation in this area, which is nice to see that kind of enhancement of a buffer zone in this area, where you've got the coastal bank and then salt marsh right below. So this area right here will have a nice buffer zone component to it on that side of the property. I think that's the extent of my comments. As already been explained, my only other comment is the house is being pulled back from the coastal bank from the existing setback of the current home. I know it's a tight site. I met out there with both of you, and it took a lot of creative thinking to get this kind of plan in such a tight area. So I appreciate the effort, especially with the added mitigation. So I don't see any impact to the coastal bank. One of the things that was brought up at the meeting, you may recall, was because of the proximity of work taking place to this coastal bank, that I had recommended that there may be a condition of weekly monitoring reports being submitted should this be approved during the construction period because of that setback distance and closeness to the excavation and proximity to the coastal bank. So I would recommend that as a condition, that there be weekly monitoring reports submitted to the Conservation Department during the construction period, so that we're aware of any potential impacts that may destabilize the bank, as it's such tight working quarters there when it comes to construction. So no other comments. I'll hand it over to Caitlin.
Sure, the building comments are as follows. This project was determined to be sent to ZBA for several reasons. The proposed retaining walls are over 4 feet in height and are placed along the property line. I am of the opinion that these types of structures should require a 5-foot setback in order to conform to 174-31 land space requirements table footnote 23 of the Mashpee zoning bylaws. I believe this will prevent encroachment of neighbors' property during construction and complaints regarding runoff and erosion after construction. Board of Health states that the property is partially in a Zone 2 and restricted to existing 3 bedrooms with conventional system proposed to be constructed within Zone 2. Septic plan and floor plan to be reviewed upon submission to Health and Building Departments respectively. I'm going to hold off on the abutters.
Huh?
I'm going to hold off on the
Yeah,
abutters.
they're here.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. Questions and comments from the commissioner?
Is the DEP issue that you raised?
They have since the comments were made, so we do have the DEP number.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm
Right up
also-
against the wire.
I'm also curious as to anybody here knows that there was a whole host of people here earlier, and as soon as this item came before us, they disappeared. Is
There's
there
still
an
some
issue
people
that
here.
We've not been made aware of? Why did the entire structure, the brass of the planning board, sit here and listen?
I think they were here for the Chop Chake and Upper Questionnaire updates.
They were still here when we were going through individual.
I don't have an answer to that.
I'm curious. I was led to believe it could be this project.
I don't know. I'm not going to speculate.
Okay. Take my, stop asking questions.
I don't think there's any more comments from the commissioners.
Anyone in the audience or on the phone that would like to add questions or comments?
There are members of the audience who wish to comment, yes. And we'd ask that you come up to the table, if you don't mind, step up to the microphone. Please give your... Yeah, sure, and each person who comes up, please give your name for the record, and then you can state your concerns, comments.
Good evening. My name is Margaret Joyce Kavanaugh, and I am I am the representative from the Kavanaugh Family Trust. I am the trustee of the Kavanaugh Family Trust, and I am representing the trust as well as my children and myself. This property is the immediate abutter at 28 Sandall Lane. We only received notice of this meeting 2 days ago, exactly 2:30 on Tuesday. I received a certified letter, and I immediately called the Conservation Office, and I talked to, I believe, Mr. McManus, who was kind enough to send us the plans and any of the narratives and information that went along with this. But this was the first time that we had any idea of this meeting or anything about the proposal of the site. So we didn't have much time to prepare ourselves. Neither my children nor I are architects or engineers or any of that, but we did take some time yesterday to try to look over the plan extensively to try to understand it. And that from our point of view, we felt that there is, for us, there is a number of concerns environmentally, conservation, plantings, zoning, and the aesthetics, and the effect that this would have on our property as well as our close neighbors. As I said, while we're not architects and we're not engineers, we did try to call Mr. Bunder yesterday, but given the circumstances of the weather yesterday, my daughter was not able to reach him. She did try several times, because we wanted to actually know if we had some questions as to whether or not we were interpreting the plans correctly. But what the current plan appears to us, that there's a meaningful change in the topography of the site. It appears that the proposed house is being raised with the installation of a huge retaining wall, which is running between 12 feet to 20 feet around the house. And I believe I heard the gentleman before say 17 feet, 12 feet, and 20 feet. Our property directly next door already gets flooding that runs down the street, down the driveway, and pools in the front and the side of our house and near our basement. While we noted that there are various dry wells in the plan, we are concerned with the increased elevation right next door that we are going to see even more water runoff from their property, and that there might be damage to our property and our foundation. I'd actually like someone to clarify if we're interpreting the plans correctly. Is there basically a retaining wall being put in, which is going to have a large mound in back of it? And is the house then going to be placed on top of this mound? Which that then would raise the house considerably. If our understanding is correct, what if any studies have been completed to ensure that the dry well and the containment methods outlined in the plan will be sufficient to protect our property, as we are unaware of anyone doing any testing or evaluation of our land next to theirs? If this change is made, the topography might result in damage to us, and what remedies would be available to us, and to what expense if it did cause runoff of water and flooding. Given the change of height of the house itself from the existing home is increasing. The basement is going from 9 feet to 11 feet. The main floor is increasing from 17 feet to 22 feet. That is an increase of 7 feet. Then, if our interpretation is correct, there is going to be a retaining wall and the house is going to be raised, then we need to add another 17 to 20 feet onto that. So I know the gentleman said that the height of the house was 2.5 stories and that it was going to be within the guidelines of 35 feet. But then if we add on the retaining wall and the additional mound of dirt that what it will be placed on, that actually is far in excess of 35 feet. It's a total change in the topography of the land. And given the change of this, we are very concerned with what that will do to our property. Will this change the viability of the flora and the fauna in the area? For example, because the rain does run off, as I already mentioned that the rain does run off, and we have limited sunlight, there's already substantial moss that grows along the Sims property line. A further reduction in sunlight will really have an impact on our property. In summary, what we're requesting, since we had such short notice, that we did not have the opportunity to consult with the proper professionals, that we would like ourselves to engage our own engineer, our own site plan advisor, and any other professionals that are necessary so that we understand the impact that this substantial, and I'd like to emphasize the word substantial change, will have on our water runoff, our flood risk, and the solar impact on our house. I also would like to emphasize that we want to be neighborly with the Sims. We're not trying to be obstructionists, but it's my fiduciary responsibility to assure that the enjoyment of our home, the integrity of our home, and the value of our home are not jeopardized. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, ma'am. Are there others who would like to make commentary from the audience?
May I just ask one question? We did submit a comment to go into the record. I didn't hear it read, so I just wanted to make sure you did receive it.
Is it anything above and beyond what you already stated?
It's similar to what I already stated.
If you wish to have it read for the record, we can, but if it's substantially the same as what you
It
stated.
is substantially the
will be-
same, but I would like just to have it in for the record too, if
Okay.
you can.
My name is Jackie Kavanaugh. My mother, Margaret Joyce Kavanaugh, is a trustee of the Kavanaugh Family Trust, which is the owner of 28 Sand-Dollar Lane, the direct abutter to 30 Sand-Dollar Lane. We received the registered letter 2 days ago and requested the site plan from the commission. We did attempt to call Mr. Thomas Bunker at BSS Design of Falmouth, signer of the application, multiple times to try to get a better understanding of the site plan. Unfortunately, due to weather, the phone lines appeared to be down all day. While none of us are professional builders or architects, having spent numerous hours looking over the plans, it appears to us, although we may be incorrect, that the current proposal will meaningfully change the topography of the site. Specifically, it appears that the proposed house is being raised with the installation of a huge retaining wall ranging in size from 20 to 12 feet around the house. Our property directly next door already gets flooding that runs down the street, down our driveway, and pools at the front and side of our house near the basement doors. While we noted the various dry wells on the plan, we are concerned that with the increased elevation right next door, that we are going to see even more rainwater runoff from our property, as well as that will then damage our property and foundation. 1, could someone please clarify if our reading of the plans are correct, i.e. they're basically building a huge hill mound with a retaining wall around it and then the house on top? 2, if our understanding is roughly correct, what if any studies have been completed to ensure that the dry wells and containment methods outlined in the plan will be sufficient to protect our property, as we are unaware of anyone doing any testing or evaluation of our land next to theirs? 3, if the changed site plan topography does result in damage to our property, what remedies at that point would be available to us and at whose expense? 4, given the changed height of the house, what, if any, analysis has been done to assess the solar impact on the property and abutting properties, and will that change the viability of the flora fauna in the area? As an example, because of the rain runoff mentioned above and limited sunlight, there is already substantial moss growth along the Symes property line. This is going to further reduce the sunlight that reaches there. 5, could we request a 30-day delay on issuance of this board's opinion so we have the time to engage our own engineer and site plan advisor to consult with what impacts this substantial change will have on our water runoff, flooding risk, and solar impact? Respectfully yours, Jackie and Joyce Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Caitlin. Other questions and comments from the public?
There are, yes, there are additional comments.
Please come forward and identify yourself for the record.
Ellen and Anthony Hudon, we're from 26 Sand-Dollar Lane. We're one house behind Joyce Kavanaugh. We have several concerns that we've posted to the Architectural Review Committee at New Seabury, and we have not heard back yet from them regarding all of our concerns. But in general, what we are seeing going on here is that there are direct violations to what our association protects us from, primarily taking away our views of Aquay Bay. Besides that, raising of the house, taking our view away, there's also over 50 arborvitaes being planted, which can grow in excess of 15 feet tall. They're being placed at the top of the property, and that will certainly obstruct our view, regardless of what the height of the house is, even if it doesn't go beyond what it is today. We think that they're overdoing what they think they should do in accordance to the need to take away trees and then add more vegetation to compensate. So these additional arborvitaes are being spread around the perimeter of the home are in excess, and it's nothing more than a means of protecting themselves and giving themselves privacy. There's additional trees on the left of the house as you face the water that are being proposed to be put in, which will also grow high enough to easily obstruct our views. Not only our views, but the views of all of our neighbors.
The eastern red cedar grows to 40 to 50 feet.
For an example, the eastern red cedar that they propose grows in excess of 40 feet. There's also some other plants down near the water's edge on the right-hand side of the house as you see it facing the water. They're taking plants that are already there. I understand they're not native plants, they're Japanese yews, but their root system is very well integrated into that bank. And in fact, I think it's the only thing holding the bank up in that area. If they dig that all out and then try to plant a native plant in there just so that it's a native plant, I don't see the point. They're running the risk of additional erosion in that location. And I think that, that whole area is very fragile as it is. We've been there for over 8 years, and we've been watching the degradation of that whole coastal area. There's a reserve area that runs down from the end of the cul-de-sac along their property line that they're looking for all these easements, all these variants to be issued so that they can put their tank in that location and so on and so forth. I don't agree with any of that. I think that all of these variants that they're seeking should be denied because all of this additional changes are going to potentially cause sewage runoff into that reserved area, which is all gravel. So that reserved area, which is a steep ramp that goes down to the water's way, will become nothing more than a leach field.
Currently, from our second floor deck, we have a very clear view of Aquay Bay. And even a small increase, 4 feet, where we have our view, will pretty much obliterate our view of Aquay Bay. We bought that house in 2013 with a clear listing from the real estate saying water view. That was one of the reasons that drew us to this area. And for someone to propose to take our view away, obviously, it's not something we are going to accept lightly. And we do have communication into our Peninsula Council, which is our homeowners association. I understand Mashpee, the town of Mashpee, has no view ordinances, but our homeowners association does. So I know we appreciate you listening because we're not sure where this falls. Plantings, we believe, would be part of this discussion, and the plantings that are being proposed could easily just block our view and cause our home value to decrease significantly. Thank you.
And just to reiterate, one of the primary things in our association that's noted right in the very beginning of their dissertation is that they are there to protect our property values and our views. It's stated black and white. So I would hope that the engineering team here that's put these plans together through a lot of pain, I'm sure, has had sit-downs with these folks and have come to some kind of agreements that will not disrupt our views. And if they have any comments on that today, I'd be in favor of hearing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Just for everyone's information, the Conservation Commission's purview is to examine town bylaws for the purposes of conservation. Things such as zoning, the homeowners association rules, our purview, our decision on. That having said, is there anyone else in the audience who would like to make commentary at this time?
Yes.
Would it be possible for the gentleman to give an explanation or explain if
Yes.
our understanding was correct about the retaining wall being 17 feet and
think they would be given an opportunity. Ma'am?
Additionally, so that
Ma'am?
we have a total of
Ma'am?
Ma'am, we cannot hear you
Can
on the phone.
Can I have an opportunity to answer your question?
I'm sorry?
Can I have an opportunity to answer your question?
Oh, yes, I just.
Thank you. Yes, the chairman will recognize and give the applicant's consultants an opportunity to explain.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, and I understand the abutters' concerns. The characterization, I think generally is, it's a house that's being built taller. Zoning does not allow a hill to be created and then have a house 35 feet tall built on top of that. Of the roof, no matter how much fill or retaining wall is put in, is 35 feet taller, that would be 49.8, and we're not above that. There are retaining walls, and the retaining walls are there only, as I explained, so that that lowest grade would be considered a basement and not a living habitable first floor. So the retaining walls themselves are not allowing it to become a taller house. There are retaining walls, and she's correct as far as the elevations that she read off of the plan.
Can I
Yep.
just make one point on that? All of the elevations, it's not the elevation above the ground. Everything is based on sea level. So if it says 17 feet, it's 17 feet above sea level. So, or 20 feet above sea level. The existing grade along the property line near the end of the house right now is elevation, let me see that a little bit. Yeah. The elevations, I see it right on the outside of the property line. You can see elevation, if you line up the end of the house to the south, right near where it says 11 feet, you see that on the lower right-hand corner of the house itself? If you go, oh, it's not on your plan. Yeah, on the landscape. Is it
on the landscape
existing?
plan?
The elevation there is, okay, now you can see the existing contour lines south of the property line in the neighbor's property. If you move the hand down where it says proposed granite paver, right above that is elevations, there's a number on the plan, it says elevation is 1754 to the left, where the next granite paver.
South of the property line.
Yeah. Move your hand to the left a little bit.
Not the plan,
Don't move
just
the plan, just the hand. A little to the left and a little bit
There.
down, right there. That's 17.5, so the wall's at 20 feet there, so it's 2.5 feet above that grade. The property does slope down as you go down the hill along the face of that wall, so that at the highest point where the wall drops, if you move the hand a little more to the left where the contour number 14 is, right there. See, the wall is at 20 feet above sea level there. The ground next to it on your property is elevation 14, so the wall will appear to be 6 feet high right there. Then it drops down to elevation 17.1, I think it is, just to the left where the elevation is 13. You can move your hand to the left. See where it says 13? Right there, the wall is at elevation 17, so the wall is going to be 4 feet high right there.
What do you need a wall 6 feet high for in one location?
Because we have to get the grade, the average grade around the perimeter of the house to be, on average, no more than 6 feet below the first floor, or the basement becomes the first floor, and then the house is a 3-story house. So it's a zoning rule that is forcing us to put the wall around and fill in between. Then the wall is going to stick up a little bit above the grade everywhere between the house and the wall. The wall sticks up a little bit. So no water runoff is going to go over the wall to go onto the abutting property. So you won't have additional runoff going on to your property.
So, sir, can I just ask you, because I'm not very knowledgeable in this, to be honest. So where it said on the
Yeah, yes, in that location. So your property slopes downward. The top of the wall is gonna stay level. So your property is like this, the top of the wall is like that. So when you get all the way to the left end of the house, the wall's gonna be 6 feet high there. But back toward the garage, it's actually gonna meet the existing ground.
But where their deck is now, the part of the house that looks down to the water, I saw there it said 17 feet and 4 feet and 20 feet. Is that going to be about 4 feet, that wall?
Yeah, it's gonna be, at the left side, the wall will be, at one point it gets to be 6 feet high, just a little bit more than 6 feet high. And then the top of the wall drops down to elevation 17, where it will be 4 feet high. So when you get to the end of the house, it's gonna go from 4 feet, and the top of the wall is gonna be level. The property keeps going down, but it doesn't go down a substantial amount to make that wall look taller as you turn that corner from the property line. So you're changing
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, point of order. There's supposed to be dialogue going through the chair, and these questions are all not relevant to conservation. Perhaps Tom and Andrew can meet with them outside after the hearing and discuss this?
I would suggest the wall height, it has something to do with drainage, so I think it is.
It is
point.
related to conservation. Thank you for your comment, Matt, but it's not your project. Yes, I do believe there are relevant concerns related to drainage that need to be discussed, so please carry on.
So anyway, there's one thing that Andrew mentioned in his related to the drainage, that the top of that wall is higher than the ground adjacent to the house. So for any water, for one thing, the downspouts will go into pipes down into dry wells, but also any rainfall that's just falling directly on that ground between the wall and the house will be captured in that area and not run off onto abutting property.
I got just a quick question, because you show here the maintenance path, mulch maintenance path, and you've got dry wells in here? So are these dry wells, these
Yes.
symbols?
Yep.
So how does that work if you've got mulch over the
Well,
path?
they're under the ground, so the pipes go into them under the ground. The
Okay.
mulch is just leaving,
You don't think that'll interfere with their
non-mitigation.
capacity for drainage at all?
I'm sorry?
Will that interfere with their capacity for drainage? If they're
There are
covered
no
over?
inlets in the mulch.
Okay,
It's piped
they're just-
underground. It's just
okay.
put it under the path so that it wouldn't interfere with the planting of the plants,
Right.
Mitigation.
which are outside of the path.
Okay.
One other thing I'd point out as far as sunlight, I mean, this property is to the north of the abutting property, so whatever's done here is certainly not going to increase shade on a property which is to the south of it.
I don't see any additional comments, Chad, from the audience.
Thank you, Drew. I was unable to consider much of the commentary as the speakers were not coming to the microphone and I could not hear them. So I'll defer to the commission. Are there any other questions or comments with the commission, or first with the commissioners?
I don't see any.
Anyone from the general public who would like to make further commentary?
Could I just say one
Tom
thing?
Bunker has a comment.
Just generally to the abutters, this is going to the Board of Appeals. I don't think it's been filed yet, but it will be appearing for the Board of Appeals, where there's much more leeway for voicing concerns
Sure.
That are non-conservation.
that are not conservation related.
Right.
And that's where they'll take up views and
Sure.
things like that.
Yeah, it is much more under the zoning's purview, those issues. But I think drainage was a legitimate concern to have discussion on.
Totally
so
agree.
Appreciate that.
Are there further commentary from the audience?
Nope.
Hearing none, we'll entertain a motion.
Could you return to your comments? I'm having a hard time finding it again right now, so that I can see any issues that you had, should they be conditions.
Yes, I mean, well, one of the conditions that we can certainly put in, and we do this on a number of different projects, kind of as a boilerplate. And I can't, you didn't read, did you already read Board of Health?
I did, yes.
Okay, all right. So when it comes to runoff concerns, you know, knowing that that's going to involve more discussion with zoning, but we can have a condition that addresses that concern in some way. Where if runoff, if any results of the construction of this project results in increased runoff onto the neighboring property, something to that effect, that they will be required to address that situation. I don't have the exact wording, but I'm sure we can come up with something that will
Yeah, I mean, that's
address
really
that.
just compliance with the town bylaws, though. The town bylaws, don't they state that in fact there is runoff from one property to another?
I'm assuming there's got to be something under zoning. I don't know off the top of my head. I only know that you can, because the property is within jurisdiction, that you can condition that runoff not be exacerbated on abutting properties as a result of the construction of this project.
Okay. You know your bylaws better than I, but, you know, I mean, that in the case of New Seabury, that is held up as gospel, so to speak.
Oh, sure.
About no runoff allowed from one lot to another, and we always hang that on the town bylaws.
Okay. Yeah, I don't doubt that. I just don't know the specific citation off the top of my head.
I don't see that that's a condition to this needed.
Okay.
I mean, if you feel comfortable, we can put some words in there that would say, you know, we condition it that no runoff would be allowed from this property to the adjoining properties. And that's fine, but I think that's, you know, that's almost gospel.
Sure.
So I don't feel it's needed.
Yeah.
If
I mean,
any of the other
My
commissioners.
gut feeling is that it's going to get addressed through ARC, zoning.
Oh, yeah.
Other boards aside from this one that, you know.
And the ARC hangs that on the town bylaws.
Yeah,
So
okay.
I don't think it's necessary.
Okay, that's fine.
It will be very strongly considered.
Sure.
Question.
Okay.
So, if that's the case.
There are no other comments. We'll entertain a motion.
I would move that we, wait a minute, that we move that this is a application of Jody and Alexandra Symes at 30 Sandollar Lane, that we close and issue.
Do I hear a second? Do I hear a second, or did that cut Brad off? I apologize.
Second, I'll second, Brian.
Brian, second.
Thank you, Brad. Now voting. Tom?
Aye.
Brian?
Yes.
Paul?
Yes.
Brad?
Yes?
I vote aye as well. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Drew, if you could return us to the pre- and post-hearing agenda?
Sure.
One more.
Thank you.
It's a certificate of compliance. That did pass
Yeah,
inspection.
that's fine after the fact.
No issues on that?
As soon as you see COC, it's shut down.
So we'll skip over the first few discussion items after Horsley Witten to get to 140 Pompanesett Island, because Matt's still here, and I don't want to keep him. We can go over the other items. There's no urgency, so we can address that now.
Thank you.
Okay. Whenever you're ready, Matt.
Do you have this plan?
I don't.
It's 4 minutes or whatever.
Did we forward this to the commissioners?
I did.
Yes.
3 minutes.
You all have this, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, so this is not a hearing, just a discussion. This is having to do with the enforcement order for 140 Pompanesett Island. If you recall, it was recently before you for Pier construction. Then Caitlin discovered, doing some research, that some trees had disappeared over the years. So there was an enforcement order to mitigate for the trees. Our office met with Drew and the owner on site and discussed mitigation. Drew did recommend a vegetated buffer strip to run the length of the lawn, and that to be planted with appropriate shrubs. And it's not often, we rarely disagree with Drew, and sometimes our clients disagree, and sometimes we talk our clients into agreeing, but in this case we can't. So our client is proposing a compromise, which included two vegetated areas shown on the plan that was submitted to you. I don't know if you guys happen to have it, but
We don't have it.
It's in the email.
Oh, it's in an email? Yeah.
so there's, I could show you a reduced copy if you'd like.
Sure.
But what they want to do is instead of having a strip that removes, instead of having a strip of lawn removed across the entire back, they want to break it up into two planted bed areas on either side. And in those include the replanting of trees, and they're called out in the plan, but 2 3-inch in the first mitigation area. Planting bed number 1 is 380 square feet. 2 3-inch caliber eastern red cedars, 1 3-inch caliber white oak, and then some shrubs, 9 shrubs in total. And then in planted area number 2, 2 3-inch caliber tupelos, 1 3-inch caliber white oak, and then some shrubbery. Now, this is not a final plan we're submitting or anything like that. It's just for discussion to get some feedback from the board to see if the board would be okay with that planting arrangement. So that's the purpose of being here. So what do you think?
Thank you, Matt. We'll hand it to Drew first for some comments and then turn it back to the commissioner.
I'll make my comments pretty brief. The enforcement order that we sent out for this particular situation does require, it was anticipated during the on-site that I had a discussion with Mark Dibb from Cape and Islands and the homeowner. Turned out to be, a proposal for, a balance, a counteroffer, if you will, on what was recommended at the meeting when the enforcement order was brought before the commission. In the enforcement order, it does have a requirement that the property owner engage with a landscape designer, horticulturalist, or wetland consultant. None of that took place during the on-site. The on-site was just a kind of question and answer. What can we do here to reach a compromise? Which I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but that portion of the enforcement order hasn't been complied with yet. So I'll bring that up just as my comment leading into this. Considering that it was 6 mature trees that were removed, I don't think this is sufficient mitigation. I still believe that what was recommended before the commission and that you endorsed at that meeting should be what they present. If they don't agree with it, then I don't really know what else to say. I mean, I don't know if you can really appeal an enforcement order. It's pretty clear cut what the order says, but that's not to say that the commission, shouldn't be open to a compromise. Just giving you my feedback on what the language of the enforcement order contains and what happened during the on-site. One of the other, just to quickly mention, in the explanation, which you all should have a copy of in the email with this plan that was attached, Mark Dibb had mentioned that the fact that arborvitaes were planted and that kind of presented that as an environmental benefit to where these mitigation areas were proposed. The first thing I'll say about that is arborvitaes, no record of any permitting for those arborvitaes. And it's general opinion when it comes to wildlife habitat value that arborvitae are at the low end of that scale. And if we were given the opportunity to review landscape plantings on this property before they were put in, we certainly would have had that input made back then that they should be anything other than arborvitae in the interest of wildlife habitat. And that's kind of how Mark presented it as his line of reasoning in the email, which I thoroughly disagree with. So that's all the comments I have.
Just quickly on that, if you did read his email, that wasn't the sole reason for his
I didn't say it was the sole reason.
rationale.
It was one of the reasons.
It wasn't the primary reason. He added as note number 5 at the bottom, so you can disregard that. We will submit a plan, and we will hire a landscape professional. We're not exactly novices at this ourselves. We can outline some areas and some plants for discussion purposes, and that's what we're doing. We have a client that doesn't agree with what was presented, and he's offering an alternative. And yes, enforcements can be appealed. They have to be done within 60 days, according to the client's attorney. So we're here trying to talk about what the board would approve. And I know back when we were discussing this enforcement during the other hearing, there was feedback from some commissioners on why there was a requirement for a vegetated buffer strip when there was cutting of trees. So we're just looking for your feedback.
Comments from the commissioner?
All right, so let me ask a more poignant question. Would the board approve mitigated areas shown on the plan as compensation for the trees?
Now, they can speak, and anyone else feel free to jump in as well. Speaking from experience, we typically, when we have the opposite situation, where we have a homeowner who's come before us with an application and there is an issue to be resolved, typically what we'll do is offer a condition that necessitates the applicant work with the conservation agent to hammer out a mitigation plan. And since I've been here, which arguably is not that long, none of those have come back to us for review. So this is a situation where, regardless of the enforcement order, if this were an application coming before us, we would defer to work with the homeowner so we could move the permit forward and go with what the conservation meant. In this case, it's coming at it from the opposite direction for an enforcement order. And I can speak for myself, and other commissioners speak for themselves, but I personally defer to the judgment of the conservation agent, which is.
You're cutting out, Chad. I don't know if you're in an area of bad reception.
I think I got
Yes.
the gist of it.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Basically, what I just said, I'll make it short, is that we defer to the conservation agent when we have an applicant coming in and there needs to be a mitigation plan devised. We'll often make a condition that says applicants shall work with conservation agent on a mitigation plan. This is coming from the opposite direction, an enforcement order. And I personally would defer to the conservation agent's opinion, but the counteroffer is not to recommend that there are other parts of the enforcement order that haven't been addressed. So for me, I will support Drew's opinion that this.
I understand what he's saying.
Understood, Chad. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments from the commissioners, applicant, or the conservation agent?
Well, I heard applicants this evening ask for leniency in regards to not have enough time to consider the matter. And here we got this on Tuesday afternoon. I'm trying to check dates and whatever have you. I looked at it, I glanced at it. I didn't have an opportunity with the weather and all of the issues that come with that.
Right.
To even spend any time looking at it. I thought it was so straightforward that it would be a rubber stamp, and I apologize, I come unprepared.
commission wishes to have more time. I mean, the only reason it was submitted by Tuesday is because we informed the homeowner and Mark that it has to be, in order to get on a pre-post agenda, you have to submit 48 hours in advance of a meeting. I understand the circumstances leading up to this meeting reduced that time, so if this wants to be brought back before the commission as a possibility for a future meeting date, I don't have any issue with that.
I concur, giving the applicant more time.
More time to
Conservation agent, and the commissioners, I think that's fair.
Okay. Does that sound reasonable?
I honestly couldn't hear his last part.
No, having this discussion tabled for the next meeting to give the commissioners more opportunity to review.
Sure.
Email and the plan.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. There's no vote that needs to take place for that. It's just a discussion.
Just continue with the discussion, because it's not even an official agenda item, right?
No, it's just an informal post-hearing agenda item. Well, it's related to an enforcement matter, but yeah, it's not an official hearing request. So.
I prefer to defer, delay, whatever the word would be, so that we put it on the pre or post agenda item next time.
So what is the next one?
November 18th. It's the only one in November. November and December, we're down to one hearing a month for those 2 months.
Okay. Well, that concludes that again, I guess. Thank you for your
Thank you, Matt.
time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Sure, if you could continue with our pre-post agenda item?
Yes. So just, I'll try to get through these quickly because I know it's been a long evening. This discussion briefly on harbor management plan, you all received or were forwarded an email from our Director of Natural Resources, Ashley Fisher, who's in the process of applying for a grant from the Massachusetts Seaport Economic Development Council. And the whole purpose of this grant is to get some funding for the creation of a harbor management plan. So I had sent out that email to see if anyone had any feedback or comments on that, and I have since, because the deadline to submit the grant application is November 1st. So this is a last minute kind of request of a letter of endorsement from the commission for this grant application. So I did, just in the interest of time, come up with a draft letter that I have since provided to our chairman, Chad. He has reviewed it. He is fine with it. I can forward it out to everyone else, but we would need your feedback before noon tomorrow to get this out. But I'll read it for the record, and we can have a discussion if you'd like. So this is addressed to the Mass Seaport Economic Council. Ellen Sabula, rather, is the director, and I'll read the letter for the record. Dear Ellen, this letter is written to express our full support and endorsement of the recently submitted grant application from Ashley Fisher, Director of the Mashpee Department of Natural Resources, for the purposes of funding the creation of a harbor management plan for the town. The Conservation Commission is keenly aware of the impacts to our bays and harbors from coastal development, as well as commercial and recreational usage. The combination of these impacts places a heavy burden on our waterways. The creation and implementation of a harbor management plan will provide an effective framework for the town to utilize for the management of our precious waterways in a sustainable way. A harbor management plan is a top priority for the town of Mashpee and long overdue. We thank you for your time and consideration of this grant application. On behalf of the Mashpee Conservation Commission, sincerely, Chad Smith, Chairman.
Perfect.
If there's any input to that, or if you're happy with that, we can go out and provide that draft.
I think it's fine.
I think we should do like an official motion maybe, just to document it
That was going to be my next, yeah.
in the meeting minutes. So I would move to approve the draft letter for the harbor management plan.
I'll second that.
Chad?
Chad? Chad, are you there? I think he might have cut off.
That's outstanding, and we will now vote. Tom?
Aye.
Brian?
Yes.
Paul?
Yes.
Brad?
Yes.
I vote aye as well. Motion carried.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Anything else, Drew?
Yes, I'm just writing that you all endorsed it. Okay, so just going through the last discussion item, a little out of order, is Trout Pond Dam. So I had I had some correspondence with Mashpee Comments LLC and their representative Tom Ferranti. And this is in regards to, which I have the file here for, this was the recently approved repair of the culvert failure at Trout Pond. Does everyone recall that application and what it entailed?
Yep.
So, given the recent rains and extreme weather, I had reached out, and we got a lot of public concern about Mashpee Commons, plans for this area. But aside from that, given the existing conditions that we are dealing with a culvert failure, and there hasn't been any formal construction commencing yet, I have requested of Tom Ferranti to submit weekly monitoring reports to our department, because we can't get out there all the time to keep an eye on it. So putting the burden on the applicant to monitor the situation with specific criterion and submit that on a weekly basis. Well, 2 weeks went by and he didn't submit anything. He said he was waiting for a form from Horsley Witten to go by for criterion, even though I have already provided the criterion to him in an email, which I thought was more than sufficient. Since that time, 48 hours in advance of this meeting, as per our regulations and our bylaw requirements, I notified him that this would be a discussion at a public hearing of the Conservation Commission, and encouraged his attendance along with Buff Chase, CEO of Mashpee Commons. Obviously, neither of them are here tonight, but they have been given due notice in accordance with our bylaw for this discussion. So they chose not to attend, despite being given adequate notice, 48 hours. So my request, my recommendation of the commission is that you make a motion to require the submission of weekly monitoring reports for the Trout Pond culvert until such time that the culvert is, that the repair of the culvert commences, which we've heard through their consultant is the end of November, towards the end of November, mid-November. And also to take immediate action to stabilize the area through sandbags to ensure that this culvert failure does not get worse and result in significant drainage of Trout Pond, which, as you all know, is mapped as rare species habitat. So I would very much appreciate a motion to allow us as staff to send out a requirement notice to the applicant for these specific requirements. Weekly monitoring reports from their consultant, not from Mashpee Commons, and also the immediate placement of sandbags to control the runoff and erosion until such time as construction commences.
So moved. Do I hear a second?
I don't know that it makes any difference to that, but I think you should make sure, and perhaps there are people in the planning board that can ensure that you're notifying the proper people in the organization.
Sure.
I mean, you mentioned Buff Chase. At this point, I believe Sarah Chase is the CEO of Mashpee Commons, or the people that are developing this piece. I don't know.
We've been told that Tom Ferranti is
Oh, yeah, Tom, but then you mentioned Chase.
Buff Chase
You mentioned Chase. I think you need to get the right Chase.
Sure.
I mean, he's handed off most of the responsibilities to his daughter.
Sure. No, I'll make sure that everyone should be notified gets that.
Just so there's no question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Further discussion?
Who made the motion?
Who made the motion?
Oh, Chad said so moved, but I would appreciate an actual motion if it's okay with the commission.
Absolutely. Go for it.
I would move that we follow up with your request.
Or,
We endorse your request for information in regards to the Trout Pond activities, and that you receive project status meeting notes to Tom Ferranti and to, if I'm correct, Ms. Chase.
Weekly.
Weekly.
Yeah. And also the placement of erosion control at the earliest possible opportunity.
Sure, we get that in there too.
And I'll offer the second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll move to voting. Tom?
Aye.
Brian?
Yes.
Paul,
Yes.
Brad.
Yes.
I vote aye as well. Motion carries.
Thank you very much. Just real quickly to go through the updates. Latest work with Child's River Restoration was recent treatment of invasive species. That work is ongoing, and then also monitoring maintenance of plantings that were recently installed. Red Brick Road culvert, there is a new grant opportunity the town recently applied for through DER, the same agency that we submitted the previous grant under their priority projects grant program. We haven't heard back from that, but they notified us about a new grant opportunity, and it's a dam removal grant. So our DPW director has submitted an application for that, which is a very quick turnaround on that because the deadline, I believe, is today. But she did get that out in time. You all received the updates on Upper Quashnet and Choptic Bogs from Neil Price, our consultant, earlier. No new news on bylaw review subcommittee, and Johns Pond milfoil, as you know, that treatment took place, and there will be follow-up surveying in the spring and summer to see the effectiveness of that treatment, and then we can address that issue at that time. If Phragmites still persists in Johns Pond, like I said, the bottom line is it will be fully eradicated no matter what it takes, because it has to be. You can't leave it, any trace of it, or it'll just start to propagate again. So that's all I have.
I just have one additional comment, that we will be closing the conservation lands for the foreseeable future until we can do storm damage cleanup. As of right now, they are in a dangerous state, and it's going to take a lot of doing to get these places back to good. So, thank you.
Other questions or comments from the commissioners in general, or any business not yet addressed?
Just a general question, Caitlin, when you want to find out what's going on the lands, do you call out the land stewards to assist?
Yes, the AmeriCorps mostly, since they're able to use power tools, they're trained with power tools, and this is going to be a large chainsaw operation.
Oh, yeah.
But I'll generally ask, once that's done, for them to help with other general trail maintenance.
Safety first.
Oh, sure, but I just, you got so much land to cover, and land stewards, generally speaking, know their turf.
Yeah.
Or they should. And
They
if
do.
know
We
it, they could-
do often get calls from our stewards, or just the general public,
Yep.
whenever there's a situation that arises. That's how we find out about most of it. Most of the time. So.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to adjourn at 9:33 p.m.
Vote.
Could be. I think that translates into somebody needs to do a second.
Second. All those in favor?
Tom.
Aye.
Brian.
Yes.
Paul.
Yes.
Brad.
Yes, please.
That as well. Thanks for the patience with my reception, everyone.
Thank